Colonel James "Iron" Harrington sat motionless in his office at the Fort Knox Tank Training Center, his weathered hands resting on the polished oak desk. At 58, his once towering frame had begun to stoop slightly, but his steel blue eyes remained as sharp and penetrating as they had been during his days commanding an M1 Abrams in the Persian Gulf. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the blinds, illuminating the rows of medals and photographs that chronicled a lifetime of service. On the wall-mounted television, a news anchor's voice cut through the silence. The Pentagon today announced plans to slash America's tank force by 70% over the next decade, replacing the iconic Abrams with unmanned combat drones and autonomous robotic systems. The anchor continued with practiced neutrality. Defense officials cite changing warfare patterns and cost efficiency as primary motivations for the shift away from traditional armored vehicles. Harrington's jaw tightened. He'd heard the whispers for months now. Backroom discussions, budget reviews, force reassessments. But hearing it stated so plainly, so finely, sent a cold wave through his body. His phone buzzed with the message. Senator Michael Bull Carson, his old friend from Desert Storm days. The text was brief but loaded with unspoken emotion. "They're killing our branch, Jim." Harrington closed his eyes, and suddenly he wasn't in Kentucky anymore. He was back in the scorching desert of Iraq, February 26, 1991, commanding the Abrams he'd named Iron Lady through the most significant tank battle since World War II. The memory came rushing back with sensory precision, the taste of sand and diesel, the thunder of the 120-meter main gun, the crackling radio communications, and the fear, always the fear, that he kept locked away beneath a commander's resolve. Lieutenant James Harrington stood in the commander's hatch of Iron Lady, scanning the horizon through his thermal imaging sight. His tank led the formation of the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment as they pushed eastward through the Iraqi desert. Visibility was poor, just 50 meters in the driving sandstorm, but the thermal sights cut through nature's veil, revealing the ghostly heat signatures of the battlefield. "Contact front, 2 kilometers, he announced into his helmet mic. T-72s, at least a company strength. His gunner, Sergeant Pete Gaines, responded immediately. Identified, requesting permission to engage. Confirmed hostile. All stations, this is Iron 6, weapons free. I repeat, weapons free. What followed was chaos unleashed with mechanical precision. The Abrams lurched as its main gun fired, the massive recoil rocking the 60-ton vehicle. Through his sight, Harrington watched the depleted uranium round streak across the desert and punch through an Iraqi T-72 as if it were made of cardboard. The enemy tank erupted in flame, its turret blown clear off the hull in a catastrophic kill. "Target destroyed. Scanning for next target," Gaines reported with the clinical detachment that combat required. But it wasn't just one target. As they pushed forward into what would later be known as the Battle of 73 Easting, Harrington's company found itself facing the elite Republican Guard's Tawakalna division. The Americans were outnumbered nearly 10-1. "Multiple contacts bearing 090 through 120, his loader called out. "All vehicles, spread formation, engage at will," Harrington ordered. For the next hour, Iron Lady was the tip of America's spear. They destroyed tank after tank, the thermal sights revealing Iraqi crews abandoning their burning vehicles, fleeing into the storm. The sand-choked radio carried fragments of similar reports from across the regiment's line. Bravo 2, 3 kills confirmed. Charlie 4 reporting 4 T-72s destroyed, moving to next objective. This is Alpha 6, we've got infantry dismounts switching to Cokes. Harrington felt the complex emotions that would haunt him for decades. The fierce pride in American technological supremacy, the stomach-turning fear that kept his senses razor-sharp, and the inescapable guilt of what they were doing to the Iraqi tank crews, men who, like them, were just soldiers following orders. Through his commander's sight, he spotted an Abrams, about 300 meters to their right flank, suddenly erupt in flame. Not catastrophic, but the crew was bailing out under heavy fire. "Driver, right turn, full throttle, get us to Roughneck 3. The Abrams responded instantly, pivoting with surprising agility for such a massive vehicle, charging toward the dismounting tank. As they closed the distance, Harrington could see 3 crewmen had escaped, but the tank commander was still struggling to exit the hatch. "That's Carson's tank," his driver said, recognizing the markings. Harrington's heart pounded. Michael Carson wasn't just another officer. He was Harrington's academy roommate and closest friend. Gunner, target the T-72 at our 11 o'clock. Fire. On the way. Iron Lady's main gun roared again, destroying the Iraqi tank that had been targeting the disabled Abrams. Harrington didn't wait for confirmation. Driver, hold position. I'm going out. Sir, that's against protocol. I said I'm going out. Harrington was already climbing from the hatch, exposing himself to enemy fire. The heat from Carson's burning tank hit him like a physical wall as he sprinted the 30 meters across open ground. Carson was hanging halfway out of the commander's hatch, his lower body still inside, uniform smoldering. Bull, give me your hand. Carson's face was blackened with soot, eyes wide with pain and shock. Jim, my legs. I can't feel my legs. We're getting you out, now. With strength born of desperation, Harrington pulled his friend from the hatch just as a secondary explosion rocked the tank. They both tumbled to the sand, Harrington shielding Carson's body with his own as burning debris rained down around them. Carson's legs were badly burned, uniform fused to flesh in places. Harrington dragged him back to Iron Lady, where the loader helped pull Carson into the limited protection of the turret. Medic! We need a medevac, Harrington shouted into the radio as they pulled back from the front line. This is Iron 6. I have a critical casualty requesting immediate extraction. As they waited for the medical helicopter, Harrington held pressure on Carson's wounds, looking into his friend's eyes. Stay with me, Bull. That's an order. Carson's grip on his arm was surprisingly strong. Did we get them, Jim? Did we win? Harrington looked back toward the line of burning Iraqi vehicles stretching to the horizon. Yeah, Bull. We got them. The memory faded as Harrington opened his eyes back in his office at Fort Knox. That day had changed everything. Everything. For the war, for Carson, and for him. The Battle of 73 Easting had become a textbook example of American armored superiority, studied at West Point and every military academy worldwide. In just under an hour, they had destroyed an entire Iraqi armored division while suffering minimal casualties. Carson had survived, but lost his right leg below the knee. Rather than ending his career, the injury had driven him into politics, where he'd risen to become one of the most influential senators on defense matters. And now, 30 years later, they were facing a different kind of battle, one fought in committee rooms and budget meetings rather than desert sands. Harrington stood and walked to the window, watching young tank crews drilling on the training grounds below. Fresh-faced lieutenants and sergeants learning skills he feared might soon be obsolete. His phone rang. This time it was a formal call, not a text. Colonel Harrington, he answered. Colonel, this is General Westmoreland's office. The General requests your presence in Washington for the Future of Armored Forces Committee meeting on Thursday. I wasn't aware I was on that committee. You've been added, sir. The General specifically requested your participation, given your combat experience and current position at the training center. Harrington's instincts, honed by decades of military service, sensed something wasn't right. This last-minute addition felt like a political maneuver. I'll be there. Please inform the General. Very good, sir. You'll receive a briefing package tonight. The call ended, and Harrington returned to his desk to finish the day's paperwork. As base operations wound down for the evening, he gathered his things and headed to his modest on-base quarters. The promised briefing package arrived by secure courier as Harrington was preparing a simple dinner. He set aside his meal to review the documents, spreading them across his kitchen table. The file contained the expected meeting agenda, participant list, and background materials. But as he dug deeper, he found something unexpected. Draft implementation plans for the complete phase-out of main battle tanks from U.S. ground forces, with signatures indicating approval at the highest levels of the Pentagon. These weren't contingency plans or theoretical exercises. They were ready for execution. Most disturbing was the date on the documents, 18 months ago. This decision had already been made, long before any public announcement or congressional oversight. Harrington poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and continued reading. The technical assessment comparing tanks to drone systems seemed fundamentally flawed. The scenarios used to evaluate performance were sanitized, academic. Nothing like the chaotic reality of actual combat. They assumed perfect communication, ideal weather conditions, and enemies that obligingly presented themselves as clear targets. Anyone who'd actually commanded tanks in combat would spot the problems immediately, which might explain why no experienced tank commanders had been included in the assessment team. At the back of the file was a list of committee members. Most were familiar, generals he'd served with or under, defense contractors, policy experts, But one name made him pause. John Winters, CEO of Quantum Dynamics, the nation's largest manufacturer of military drones and autonomous weapons systems. Harrington pulled out his laptop and searched for information on Winters. The corporate biography was impressive. MIT graduate, former Army captain, combat experience in Iraq, successful entrepreneur who had built Quantum from a startup to a defense giant in just 15 years. Digging deeper, Harrington found a military service record. Winters had indeed served in Iraq as an infantry officer whose unit had been caught in a friendly fire incident. 3 of his men killed by what the article described as misidentified targets engaged by coalition armor. Harrington's eyes narrowed. The man leading the charge to replace tanks with drones had a personal grudge against the Armored Corps. He was still processing this revelation when his phone buzzed again. Another text from Carson. Heard you're coming to Washington. Need to talk before the meeting. Secure location. The message included an address in Alexandria, Virginia. Not Carson's home or office, somewhere off the grid. 2 days later, Harrington found himself in a private room at an unremarkable restaurant in Old Town Alexandria. The establishment seemed to specialize in discretion. The hostess had led him to the back room without asking his name, merely nodding when he mentioned a reservation for Roughneck. Carson was already there, seated at a corner table. At 60, the former tank commander retained his imposing physical presence despite the prosthetic leg. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine, but Harrington immediately noticed the tension around his eyes. Good to see you, Jim. Been too long. 3 years, Harrington agreed, taking a seat. Not since that veterans event at the White House. Carson nodded. Lot of water under the bridge since then. He looked around to ensure they were truly alone, then leaned forward. I'm guessing you've seen the draft plans. Just the executive summary and implementation timeline. Enough to know this isn't a new idea they're floating. This ship has already sailed. That's what I'm afraid of. Carson sighed heavily. The committee meeting is theater, Jim. They're not seeking input. They're managing the announcement. They want respected tank veterans like you to give the plan credibility. And you, where do you stand? Carson didn't answer immediately. He took a sip of water, eyes downcast. Bull, Harrington pressed, using the old nickname. You texted me saying they're killing our branch. Now you seem resigned to it. Maybe I am. Carson finally met his gaze. Maybe it's time, Jim. Technology changes, warfare changes. Remember when cavalry officers fought to keep their horses even after tanks proved superior in the First World War? Harrington felt as if he'd been struck. Are you seriously comparing Abrams tanks to horses after what we lived through together? I'm saying we can't let nostalgia drive military strategy. Carson's voice hardened. Drone swarms can deliver the same firepower at a fraction of the cost without risking American lives. In perfect conditions, maybe. But what about electronic warfare, communications jamming, urban combat, rough terrain? Harrington leaned forward. A tank crew can fight autonomously if needed. They can make moral judgments no AI can replicate. They can adapt to conditions no programmer ever anticipated. All valid points, Carson conceded. Points I've raised myself in committee. But the financial argument is compelling, Jim. Maintaining the Abrams fleet costs billions annually. The new quantum swarm system promises 70% cost reduction. Since when does Bull Carson put budget concerns over combat effectiveness? Harrington couldn't keep the disappointment from his voice. There's more going on here. What aren't you telling me? Carson glanced at his watch. I've said too much already. I shouldn't have texted you in the first place. Just go into that meeting with an open mind. That's all I'm asking. Like hell. Harrington's temper flared. I'm not going to rubber stamp the dismantling of the most effective ground combat force in history, not without a fight. Then you'll lose. Carson's voice dropped to a whisper. This goes higher than you think, involves more money than you can imagine. Some battles can't be won, Jim, not even by the best tank commander I ever served with. Before Harrington could respond, Carson stood abruptly. I need to get back to the Hill. My office will contact yours about the committee protocols. His tone had shifted to formal, political. Good seeing you, Colonel. Harrington remained seated as Carson left, struggling to reconcile this calculating politician with the brave tank commander who had once been his closest friend. Something was very wrong, and he was determined to find out what. As he settled his bill, Harrington noticed a business card had been left under Carson's water glass. It bore no name, just a phone number and a time, 9 p.m. At precisely 9 o'clock, Harrington called the number from his hotel room. "I've been expecting your call, Colonel Harrington." The woman's voice was professional, measured. "My name is Rebecca Chen, defense correspondent for the National Chronicle." "Ms. Chen," Harrington kept his tone neutral. "I assume Senator Carson arranged this conversation." "Not exactly. The senator doesn't know we're speaking. I've been investigating the tank replacement program for 6 months. Your name appeared on the committee list yesterday, and I have sources who suggested you might not be fully on board with the plan." "That would be accurate." "Then we should meet. I have information that didn't make it into your briefing package." They arranged to meet the following morning at the Lincoln Memorial, a location public enough to be safe but spacious enough for private conversation. Rebecca Chen proved to be younger than her voice suggested, perhaps in her late 30s, with the alert eyes and composed demeanor of a seasoned journalist. She carried a leather messenger bag and wore no press credentials. This was not an official interview. "Thank you for coming, Colonel." She shook his hand firmly. "Let's walk." As they strolled along the reflecting pool, Chen outlined what she had discovered about the tank replacement initiative. Quantum Dynamics began lobbying for this 5 years ago, very quietly. They funded studies highlighting tank vulnerabilities, sponsored war games designed to showcase drone effectiveness, and donated generously to the campaigns of key Defense Committee members. "Including Senator Carson?" Chen nodded. "He's received over $2 million in campaign contributions from Quantum subsidiaries and executives since 2020. Harrington felt sick. "That doesn't prove corruption." "No," she agreed, "but this might." She handed him a thumb drive. "These are internal Quantum communications about field tests of their drone systems. The results don't match what they've presented to the Pentagon. Their drones failed catastrophically in electronic warfare environments, performed poorly in bad weather, and made targeting errors that would have resulted in friendly fire incidents." "How did you get this?" "I protect my sources, Colonel. But I can tell you it came from someone inside Quantum who believes what they're doing is wrong." Harrington pocketed the drive. "Why bring this to me? Why not publish it?" "Corporate lawyers," Chen said grimly. "Quantum has already threatened a lawsuit that would bankrupt our publication. I need more, preferably from someone with authority and credibility. Someone like a decorated tank commander with combat experience who's serving on the Future of Armored Forces Committee." Harrington understood. She needed him as a source, as an insider who could validate what she discovered and perhaps provide more evidence. "I'll review this information," he said carefully, "but I need to verify it independently." "Of course." Chen handed him a secure messaging app code. "Contact me this way, not by phone or email. And Colonel, be careful. Quantum has billions riding on this contract, and John Winters is not a man who accepts defeat." As they parted ways, Harrington felt the familiar tension he'd known before combat, the hyper-awareness, the strategic calculation of risks and contingencies. But this wasn't the desert of Iraq or the mountains of Afghanistan. This was Washington, a battlefield with different rules but equally high stakes. Back in his hotel room, Harrington examined the files on Chen's thumb drive. They contained test results, internal emails, and video recordings of drone failures that had never been reported to the Pentagon. Most damning was footage of a swarm system losing control during an electronic attack, targeting friendly forces in a training scenario. As he watched, a chill ran through him. The incident was nearly identical to the friendly fire event that had killed 3 men in John Winters' infantry unit in Iraq. Only this wasn't enemy action or human error. It was a fundamental flaw in the autonomous targeting system. A knock at his door interrupted his review. Harrington quickly removed the thumb drive and closed his laptop. "Who is it?" he called, moving toward the door with caution. "Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, sir. Sarah Vasquez." The name registered immediately. Sarah Vasquez had been one of his most promising students at the Armored Officer Advanced Course 5 years earlier. Now she served as a technical advisor at the Pentagon. Harrington opened the door to find Vasquez in civilian clothes, her expression serious. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Of course, Sarah. Come in." Once inside, Vasquez spoke in a low, urgent tone. "I saw your name on the committee list and knew I had to warn you. This isn't a fair evaluation, sir. They've rigged the assessment metrics to favor the drone systems." "How so?" "They're testing in optimal conditions only, clear weather, open terrain, perfect communications. When some of us pushed for more realistic scenarios, we were reassigned, and the performance data they're using for the Abrams is outdated. It doesn't include the latest upgrades to fire control and protection systems." Harrington nodded grimly. "I suspected as much from what I've seen. But why? Why push so hard to eliminate tanks when they've proven their worth in every conflict since their invention? Money is the obvious answer, sir, Vasquez replied. The quantum contract is worth over 30 billion, but I think there's more to it, especially with Winters. His history with friendly fire incidents? Vasquez looked surprised. You know about that? Yes, he's had a vendetta against armored units since Iraq, but he's also heavily invested in AI weapons research beyond just drones. Word is he's positioning for contracts that haven't even been conceptualized yet. Do you have documentation? Anything concrete? Some. She removed a micro SD card from her watch. Simulation parameters, testing protocols, comparative analyses. It's not smoking gun evidence of corruption, but it shows the system is rigged against tanks. Harrington accepted the tiny card. Thank you, Sarah. This is a significant risk you're taking. With respect, sir, I learned from you that sometimes standing orders need to be questioned when the mission is at stake. She straightened, a flash of the sharp lieutenant he'd once taught showing through. The Armored Corps saved my father in Desert Storm. I won't help dismantle it based on fraudulent assessments. After Vasquez left, Harrington spent hours reviewing the combined intelligence from Chen and his former student. The picture it painted was disturbing. A coordinated, well-funded campaign to eliminate main battle tanks from the U.S. Army, driven by corporate profit and personal vendetta rather than sound military strategy. The committee meeting was 2 days away. Not much time to develop a counter-strategy. But if there was one thing James Harrington knew how to do, it was how to fight when outnumbered and outgunned. That night, the dream came again. It always began the same way, at 73 Easting, in the heart of the largest tank battle since World War II. But in the dream, events unfolded differently. In the nightmare version, Harrington couldn't reach Carson's tank in time. He watched helplessly as the burning Abrams exploded, the turret spinning skyward like a grotesque firework. He heard Carson's screams over the radio, cutting off abruptly as the ammunition cooked off. Harrington woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. Sleep wouldn't return now. It never did after that dream. He showered, dressed, and decided to use the early morning hours productively. The National Mall would be nearly empty at this hour, offering a chance to clear his head and think. Dawn was just breaking as he parked near the World War II memorial. The air was cool, the great monuments of American democracy illuminated against the lightning sky. Harrington walked purposefully, heading not for the famous landmarks but for a less visited site, the National Museum of American History. He'd arranged special access through military channels, explaining he needed to review some historical materials before the committee meeting. The security guard recognized him from the pre-approved list and let him in with a respectful nod. Harrington moved through the silent galleries until he reached the military history section. There, in a special exhibition, was what he had come to see. One of the first American tanks ever built, a replica of those used by the Tank Corps in World War I. Beside it stood a photograph of young Captain Dwight D. Eisenhower, future general and president, training America's first tank crews at Camp Colt in Gettysburg. Harrington studied the display, reading how Eisenhower had faced skepticism and resistance when tanks were first introduced. Senior cavalry officers had dismissed the new technology as a passing fad, unsuited to the realities of warfare. They had been catastrophically wrong, as 2 world wars would prove. Throughout military history, the pattern repeated. New technology faced resistance, then proved its worth, then became indispensable, until the next innovation triggered the cycle again. But tanks had demonstrated remarkable staying power, evolving rather than becoming obsolete. From the crude armored vehicles of World War I to the sophisticated M1 Abrams of today, tanks had adapted to changing warfare. They had survived the introduction of anti-tank missiles, attack helicopters, and precision munitions. Each new threat had prompted improvements rather than obsolescence. Moving through the exhibit, Harrington paused at a diorama of Operation Desert Storm, including a miniature reproduction of the Battle of 73 Easting. The accompanying text described it as the last great tank battle of the 20th century, noting how American Abrams tanks had destroyed Iraqi T-72s from beyond the range at which the Iraqi tanks could effectively return fire. That technological edge had saved American lives. But it wasn't just superior technology that had won the day. It was the crews, the human element. Trained tankers making split-second decisions in the fog of war, adapting to changing conditions, coordinating with air and infantry support. Harrington's phone vibrated with a message. It was from Rebecca Chen. Committee docs leaked. Meeting moved up to today, 2 p.m. They're trying to rush this through. He quickly texted back, "Can you meet now? Need to discuss strategy." Her reply came immediately. Lincoln Memorial, East Steps, 1 hour. As Harrington left the museum, his resolve hardened. The battle for the future of American armored warfare had begun, and he intended to fight it with every weapon at his disposal. Rebecca Chen was already waiting when he arrived, a coffee in each hand. She offered one to Harrington. "Black, no sugar, right? Educated guess for a tank commander." "Accurate." He accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "What do we know about this accelerated timeline?" "They're spooked," Chen said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Someone leaked to the Armed Services Committee that Quantum's test results were manipulated. Senator Martinez is asking questions. They want to lock in the decision before a formal investigation can begin." "Do you know who leaked it?" Chen smiled enigmatically. "Let's just say you're not the only decorated veteran concerned about this plan." They found a quiet bench and reviewed what they each knew, comparing notes and developing a strategy for the committee meeting. Chen had brought additional documents, financial analyses showing the true long-term costs of the drone program, far higher than Quantum's projections claimed. "I can't directly use any of this in the meeting," Harrington cautioned. "That would reveal you as a source and potentially compromise others." "I understand," Chen assured him, "but knowing the truth gives you an advantage. Ask the right questions. Push for complete data. Force them to address the scenarios where drone systems fail." As they talked, Harrington noticed a man in a business suit sitting too close, too still, his attention seemingly fixed on a newspaper, but never turning the pages. "We're being watched," he said quietly. "Don't look." Man on the bench to our left, blue suit. Chen didn't react visibly. "Quantum security, probably. Winters employs several former intelligence officers. We should separate." "Agreed. Take different routes back. Change transportation methods if you can." They parted casually, Chen walking toward the Washington Monument, while Harrington headed for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. He didn't look back to see if he was being followed. That would only confirm the observer's suspicions. Instead, he relied on techniques learned during his counterinsurgency training, taking an indirect route back to his hotel, doubling back occasionally, and moving through crowded areas where surveillance would be difficult. Once in his room, he prepared for the committee meeting, organizing his notes and reviewing the technical specifications of both the Abrams and the Quantum drone systems. The more he studied, the more convinced he became that the drone replacement proposal was fundamentally flawed. The Abrams, for all its age, remained a masterpiece of military engineering. Its depleted uranium armor could withstand most enemy fire. Its gas turbine engine, while fuel-hungry, delivered astonishing power and reliability. Its fire control system allowed for accurate targeting while moving across rough terrain. Most importantly, its four-person crew provided redundancy, adaptability, and human judgment that no autonomous system could match. The Quantum swarm, by contrast, relied on perfect communications, ideal environmental conditions, and algorithms that couldn't possibly account for the infinite variables of actual combat. It was a system designed by engineers who had never faced enemy fire. At 1:30 p.m., Harrington arrived at the Pentagon for the committee meeting. The security procedures were familiar: ID check, metal detector, escort to the secure conference room. What wasn't familiar was the tension he felt from the staff, the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when he approached. The conference room was already half full when he entered. He recognized most of the attendees: generals and colonels from various branches, defense analysts, procurement specialists. Carson was there, engaged in quiet conversation with General Westmoreland, the committee chair. Neither acknowledged Harrington's arrival. John Winters sat at the far end of the table, surrounded by Quantum executives and technical staff. He was younger than Harrington had expected, perhaps mid-40s, with the lean build of a distance runner and the focused intensity of a predator. When their eyes met across the room, Winters nodded slightly, a gesture containing neither warmth nor hostility, simply recognition. Harrington took his assigned seat, arranged his materials, and waited as the room filled. At precisely 2:00 p.m., General Westmoreland called the meeting to order. "Gentlemen, ladies, thank you for adjusting your schedules for this accelerated session. As you know, the Future of Armored Forces Committee has been tasked with evaluating the proposal to transition from traditional main battle tanks to the Quantum Autonomous Combat System. After 6 months of analysis, We are prepared to make our recommendation to the Secretary of Defense. 6 months? Harrington kept his expression neutral, but inwardly he was seething. The committee had been working for half a year, yet he'd been added just days before the final decision. For those new to the committee, Westmoreland continued with a pointed glance at Harrington, let me summarize our findings. The quantum system demonstrates superior performance across all key metrics: deployment speed, precision targeting, operational cost, and most importantly, crew survival rate, as there is no human crew at risk. He gestured to an aide who distributed glossy presentation folders to each committee member. The full analysis is in your packets. You'll note that even under the most stringent testing conditions, the Quantum Swarm outperformed the M1A3 Abrams by significant margins. Harrington opened his folder and quickly scanned the executive summary. The results seemed too perfect, the quantum system winning every comparison by suspiciously wide margins. He flipped to the testing methodology section and immediately spotted what Sarah Vasquez had warned him about. All tests conducted in optimal conditions, with no electronic countermeasures, no adverse weather, no urban environments. General, Harrington spoke up, I noticed the testing parameters seem limited. Was any evaluation conducted under electronic warfare conditions, or in urban environments where communications might be compromised? A moment of awkward silence followed. Westmoreland glanced at Winters, who smoothly interjected, Colonel Harrington raises an excellent point. In fact, we conducted supplemental testing under precisely those conditions last month. The results are not in your current packet as they were just certified yesterday, but I'm happy to provide a verbal summary. Winters stood and moved to the front of the room with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. Under simulated electronic warfare conditions, the Quantum Swarm demonstrated 97% effectiveness through our proprietary counter-jamming protocols. In urban environment testing, effectiveness remained above 90% thanks to mesh networking capabilities that maintain swarm cohesion even when individual units lose primary communications. The numbers were still too perfect. Harrington had spent enough time in actual combat to know that nothing, no weapon, no system, no plan ever performed at 90+% effectiveness in real-world conditions. Were these tests conducted by independent evaluators, he asked, or by quantum personnel? Winter's smile tightened slightly. The tests were overseen by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, with quantum technical staff present to ensure proper system operation. And the raw data? Is that available for review? Of course, Winters replied smoothly. Though it contains proprietary algorithms that would require appropriate security clearance and non-disclosure agreements. General Westmoreland cleared his throat. I believe we're getting into unnecessary technical details. The DARPA verification is sufficient for our purposes. With respect, General, Harrington persisted, as this committee is recommending the elimination of our entire tank force, I believe technical details are precisely what we should be examining. Carson spoke up for the first time. Colonel Harrington, while your combat experience is valuable, the technical assessment has been thorough and validated by our nation's leading experts. Unless you have specific evidence contradicting these findings, I suggest we move forward. The message was clear. Stand down. Harrington considered his options. He could reveal what he knew about the manipulated test results, but that would expose Chen and Vasquez as sources. He could demand more rigorous testing, but the committee seemed poised to approve the recommendation regardless. Or he could change tactics entirely. General Westmoreland, distinguished committee members, Harrington began, his voice taking on the commanding tone that had carried across battlefields. I understand the appeal of autonomous systems. The promise of warfare without American casualties is powerful. But as someone who has commanded tanks in actual combat, I must emphasize what these performance metrics can't quantify. He stood, commanding the room's attention. An Abrams tank isn't just a weapons platform. It's 4 American soldiers working in perfect coordination, making split-second moral and tactical decisions no algorithm can replicate. It's a psychological deterrent that demonstrates American commitment in ways drones cannot. It's proven technology that functions when communications fail, when weather deteriorates, when the unexpected occurs, as it always does in war. Harrington looked directly at Winters. I'm not opposing progress or innovation. I'm advocating for thorough, realistic evaluation before we discard a combat system that has never failed us on the battlefield. If the Quantum Swarm is truly superior, it will demonstrate that under conditions that accurately reflect modern combat, including against adversaries with advanced electronic countermeasures. The room had gone completely silent. Even Westmoreland seemed caught off guard by the passion and authority in Harrington's voice. I propose a simple amendment to this committee's recommendation, a direct comparative field test. The M1A3 Abrams versus the Quantum Swarm in realistic combat scenarios, including electronic warfare environments, adverse weather, and urban settings, evaluated not just by technical experts, but by combat veterans who understand how systems perform when plans meet reality. Winters was the first to recover. While Colonel Harrington's passion is admirable, such testing would delay implementation by months, possibly years. The security landscape doesn't afford us that luxury. On the contrary, Harrington countered, rushing to replace a proven system with an untested one is the greater security risk. What's the harm in ensuring we're making the right decision, unless there's concern about how the systems might perform under truly realistic conditions? The challenge hung in the air. Winter's expression hardened momentarily before he regained his corporate composure. Quantum has complete confidence in our system under any conditions. We would welcome such testing, though we must consider the cost and timeline implications. General Westmoreland looked uncomfortable. This goes beyond our committee's mandate. We were tasked with reviewing existing data, not designing new testing protocols. Then let's amend our recommendation, Harrington pressed. Acknowledge the promising performance of the quantum system while advocating for comprehensive field testing before final procurement decisions are made. Surely that's a reasonable middle ground. Several committee members were nodding, particularly the military officers. The civilian analysts seemed more hesitant, glancing between Westmoreland and Winters. Carson surprised everyone by speaking next. I believe Colonel Harrington makes a fair point. While I'm convinced of the quantum system's superiority, additional validation through field testing would address any lingering concerns and strengthen public confidence in the transition. Harrington couldn't hide his surprise. Was this the real Carson breaking through the political facade, or another tactical maneuver? General Westmoreland recognized he was losing control of the narrative. Let's take a 15-minute recess to consider this proposal. We'll reconvene at 3:15. As the committee members filed out, Winters approached Harrington directly. Impressive performance, Colonel. I admire your dedication to the Armored Corps. His tone was collegial, but his eyes were calculating. Though I wonder if nostalgia is clouding your judgment. Technology moves forward. The horse gave way to the tank, now the tank gives way to autonomous systems. Fighting this transition only delays the inevitable. Maybe, Harrington acknowledged, or maybe I've seen enough combat to know that no technology is infallible and redundancy saves lives. The history of warfare is littered with inevitable transitions that prove premature. Winters smiled thinly. History is written by the victors, Colonel, and in this case, victory will be determined not on the battlefield, but in committee rooms like this one. He lowered his voice. You should know that certain journalists and Pentagon staffers have been accessing classified information about our testing protocols. That's a serious security breach. The threat was barely veiled. Winters knew about Chen and possibly Vasquez. Security breaches are indeed serious, Harrington replied evenly, as are falsified test results and manipulated procurement processes. Something dangerous flashed in Winters' eyes before he could mask it. Careful, Colonel. Unsubstantiated accusations can end careers, even distinguished ones. Before Harrington could respond, Carson appeared at his side. Jim, got a minute? He nodded curtly to Winters. If you'll excuse us. Carson led Harrington to a quiet corner of the hallway. What the hell are you doing? He hissed. You were supposed to observe, not hijack the committee. What happened to you, Bull? Harrington demanded. The man I served with wouldn't rubber stamp a decision this important without proper testing. You think I haven't considered every angle? Reviewed every report? I've been on this committee for 6 months, Jim. The quantum system is the future, whether you like it or not. And the $2 million in campaign contributions from quantum? Did that influence your thorough review? Carson's face flushed. Don't you dare question my integrity. I've served this country my entire adult life. Then explain why you're pushing a system with known vulnerabilities. Harrington pressed. The quantum swarm fails catastrophically under certain electronic warfare conditions. You know it, Winters knows it, and now I know it. You can't prove that. Can I? There are records, Bull, test footage, internal communications, all showing that the performance metrics presented to this committee are fraudulent. Carson's expression shifted from anger to concern. Where did you get this information? Does it matter? It exists. And if this committee recommends full tank replacement without proper testing, it will come to light. I'll make sure of it. Carson glanced around the hallway, then stepped closer. You don't understand the pressures at play here, Jim. This isn't just about tanks versus drones. It's about the future direction of American defense strategy. Autonomous systems are inevitable. The only question is whether we lead that transition or follow it. I'm not against progress, Harrington insisted. I'm against rushing into an unproven system based on manipulated data. Real testing, Bull, that's all I'm asking for. If the quantum system is truly superior, it will prove itself under realistic conditions. Carson studied him for a long moment, then sighed deeply. I'll support your testing amendment, but not because I believe it's necessary, because I know you'll burn everything down if I don't, and some battles aren't worth fighting. When the committee reconvened, the dynamic had shifted. Several members now openly supported Harrington's proposal for comprehensive field testing. Even General Westmoreland seemed to recognize the political wisdom of a more cautious approach. The final recommendation, approved by majority vote, acknowledged the quantum system's potential while requiring extensive field testing under realistic combat conditions before any final procurement decision. Most importantly, it preserved the existing Abrams fleet pending those test results. Not a complete victory, but a reprieve. Time to gather more evidence and build a stronger case. As the meeting adjourned, Harrington felt Winters watching him from across the room. The corporate executive's expression was unreadable, but the message was clear. This battle was far from over. Outside the Pentagon, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grounds. Harrington was heading toward the parking lot when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hotel room compromised. Do not return. Meet at National Mall, WAS 2 Memorial, 7 p.m. The message had come through the secure app Chen had given him. Harrington changed direction, heading for the metro instead of his car. If his hotel room had been searched, his vehicle might also be monitored. For the next several hours, he moved carefully through Washington, changing transportation methods twice, doubling back to detect surveillance, using crowds for cover. The tactics were familiar from his counterinsurgency training, though he never imagined he'd need them in his own country's capital. At precisely 7 p.m., he approached the World War II Memorial from the south side. Chen was waiting by the Atlantic Pavilion, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses despite the fading light. Your hotel room was searched approximately 2 hours ago, she said without preamble. 2 men, professional. They copied your laptop drive and planted listening devices. How do you know this? I have a source in hotel security. They have you on camera returning to the Pentagon, so they know you haven't gone back yet. What about your office, your home? Chen's expression tightened. My apartment was broken into last night. They took my backup drives, research notes, everything. My editor received a letter from Quantum's attorneys this morning threatening a lawsuit that would bankrupt the paper if we publish defamatory claims about their testing protocols. They're moving fast, Harrington noted grimly. The committee recommendation must have spooked them badly. It's more than that. Chen glanced around before continuing. My source at Quantum says Winters is under pressure from investors. They've leveraged everything on this defense contract. If it falls through or even gets delayed significantly, the company could collapse. So Winters is desperate. That makes him dangerous. Extremely. But it also creates opportunity. Desperate people make mistakes. They moved to a more secluded area of the memorial, discussing next steps. Chen would continue investigating Quantum's financial situation while Harrington would work with Sarah Vasquez to design testing protocols that would reveal the drone system's vulnerabilities. What about Carson? Chen asked. Can he be trusted? Harrington considered the question. I don't know. Something's not right there. He supported my amendment, but reluctantly. Either he truly believes in the quantum system or he's under some kind of pressure. Or both, Chen suggested. My research shows his re-election campaign is heavily funded by defense contractors, including Quantum's subsidiaries. But there might be more to it. I'll dig deeper. As they prepared to part ways, Chen handed Harrington a prepaid phone. Use this for emergency contact only. Assume everything else is compromised. Where will you go? I have safe locations. You should find one too, not a hotel. Somewhere Winters' people wouldn't connect to you. Harrington nodded. I know a place. Good hunting, Ms. Chen. You too, Colonel. The truth is on our side, but money and power are on theirs. Be careful. As Chen disappeared into the gathering darkness, Harrington considered his options. He needed a secure location, access to resources, and allies he could trust. There was only one place in Washington that met all those criteria. He pulled out the prepaid phone and dialed a number from memory. "Hey, Dad," his son's voice answered. "This is unexpected." "David," Harrington began, "I need your help. It's complicated and possibly dangerous." A pause, then, "I'm listening." 3 hours later, Harrington sat in the living room of his son's Georgetown apartment, explaining everything that had happened since he had arrived in Washington. David Harrington, an Army Apache helicopter pilot currently assigned to Pentagon liaison duty, listened intently, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. At 32, David was the image of his father in his younger days, same steel blue eyes, same strong jawline. But there had been distance between them for years. David had never forgiven his father for being deployed when his mother was diagnosed with a cancer that would eventually take her life. James had made it home just days before she died, but the damage to their relationship had never fully healed. "So you're telling me," David summarized when his father finished, "that a major defense contractor is manipulating test results to force the replacement of tanks with drone systems, and you've positioned yourself as the primary obstacle to their $30 billion contract." "That's the situation," Harrington confirmed. "And now they're conducting illegal surveillance, breaking into hotel rooms, and threatening journalists. Have you considered that you might be overreacting? That there could be legitimate reasons for the tank replacement program?" "I've considered everything," Harrington said patiently. "I've reviewed the data, David. The quantum system fails catastrophically under conditions that are common in modern combat. If we replace tanks with these drones, American soldiers will die when the system inevitably fails." David's expression softened slightly. "Okay, let's say you're right. What's your plan?" "First, secure communications and a base of operations, which you've just provided. Next, I need to coordinate with Vasquez to design testing protocols that will reveal the quantum system's vulnerabilities under realistic conditions. Finally, I need to understand what's happening with Carson. He's key to all this, but his behavior doesn't make sense." "And the journalist Chen, can she be trusted?" "I believe so. Her information has checked out so far, and she's taking significant personal risk." David nodded thoughtfully. "I might be able to help with the testing protocols. I've worked with drone systems from the air support perspective. I know their limitations." "That would be invaluable," Harrington admitted, surprised and touched by his son's offer. "Don't get me wrong," David clarified. "I'm not convinced you're right about this. But I am convinced you believe you're right and that you're genuinely concerned about soldiers' lives. That's enough for now." It wasn't full reconciliation, but it was more than Harrington had hoped for. As David showed him to the guest room, the older man felt a complex mixture of emotions: concern about the challenges ahead, determination to expose the truth, and a fragile hope that this crisis might help heal the rift with his son. That night, he dreamed again of the Battle of 73 Easting. But this time it wasn't Carson's tank that was hit. It was a future battlefield where autonomous drones turned against their own forces, their targeting systems corrupted by enemy electronic warfare. He watched helplessly as American soldiers died, betrayed by technology that had promised to protect them. Harrington woke in cold sweat just before dawn, the images still vivid in his mind. But unlike previous nights, he didn't feel despair, he felt resolve. The battle for the future of American armored warfare was just beginning, and James Harrington intended to fight it with every weapon at his disposal. Not for nostalgia or tradition, but for the lives of the soldiers who would have to live, or die, with whatever decision was made. As he watched the sunrise over the Washington skyline, Harrington thought about all the tank commanders who had come before him, from the crude armored vehicles of World War I to the sophisticated machines of today. Each generation had faced its own challenges, its own threats of obsolescence. Each had adapted rather than disappeared. Perhaps that was the answer: not tanks versus drones, but tanks and drones, each complementing the other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. An integrated force that combined the best of human judgment with technological capability. But before that vision could become reality, he had to expose the truth about the quantum system and the corrupted process that threatened to eliminate tanks entirely. That would require evidence, allies, and courage. Fortunately, James "Iron" Harrington had never lacked for courage. And as the new day dawned, he began to formulate a plan that would either save the Armored Corps or end his military career in disgrace. The morning sun glinted off the polished surfaces of the M1A3 Abrams tanks lined up in perfect formation on the Fort Irwin training grounds. Colonel James Harrington stood on the observation platform, binoculars raised, watching as the behemoths roared to life one by one. The California desert stretched before him, a vast canvas of sand and scrub brush that had served as America's premier tank training facility for decades. Impressive machines, aren't they? The voice behind him belonged to General Thomas Maxwell, commander of the National Training Center and an old friend from Desert Storm days. 68 tons of American engineering excellence. Harrington lowered the binoculars. They've served us well. And yet here we are, preparing to determine if they have a future. Maxwell handed Harrington a folder stamped with security classifications. The final testing protocols for Operation Comparative Edge. You and Winters fought like hell over these specifications. We compromised, Harrington replied, opening the folder. 3 test scenarios: desert terrain, urban environment, and degraded communications. Fair evaluation criteria for both systems. It had been 2 months since the confrontation in the Pentagon committee room. 2 months of political maneuvering, technical debates, and careful preparation. The field test that Harrington had demanded was finally happening, with far higher stakes than most of the participants realized. Quantum's people arrived yesterday, Maxwell said, nodding toward a cluster of trailers and equipment on the far side of the base. Quite an operation they've set up. Their CEO is personally overseeing the deployment. Winters is here himself? Harrington wasn't surprised. The man had billions riding on the outcome of these tests. Arrived by a private helicopter this morning. Brought a team of engineers and his own security detail. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. Seems excessive for a military evaluation. John Winters doesn't leave anything to chance, Harrington observed. Neither did he. The secure phone in his pocket contained encrypted communications with Rebecca Chen, Sarah Vasquez, and his son David. Each was playing a crucial role in his strategy to ensure these tests were conducted fairly. Maxwell studied him for a moment. You've made some powerful enemies, Jim. Word is, certain Pentagon officials and defense contractors are unhappy about these tests. They wanted a quick transition to the quantum system. If the system performs as advertised, they have nothing to worry about. And if it doesn't, Maxwell asked pointedly, then the American taxpayer and our combat troops deserve to know that before we scrap our entire tank fleet. The radio on Maxwell's belt crackled. General, quantum representatives requesting access to the test range for final calibrations. Acknowledged. Escort them to Sector 3 only. Maxwell clicked off the radio and turned back to Harrington. Your tank crews are assembled. I've given you the best we have, as requested. I hope you know what you're doing, Jim. So do I, Tom. So do I. As Maxwell departed, Harrington returned his attention to the testing grounds. In the distance, he could see vehicles moving toward the quantum compound. Among them was a black SUV that likely carried John Winters. The confrontation that had begun in Washington was about to reach its climax in the California desert. But Harrington knew that the battle wouldn't be decided by the official testing alone. The evidence that Chen and Vasquez had been gathering, the technical insights that David had provided, all pointed to a disturbing conclusion. The quantum system was fundamentally flawed, but those flaws had been systematically concealed through manipulated testing and political influence. Proving that would require more than just outperforming drones in a field test. It would require exposing the deception at the heart of the procurement process. And for that, Harrington needed the assistance of his unlikely team of allies. His phone vibrated with a message from David. In position at command center, all systems monitoring active. Harrington smiled slightly. Despite their troubled relationship, his son had become his most valuable asset in this fight. David's expertise with military drone systems had revealed vulnerabilities in the quantum design that even its creators might not fully understand. A second message arrived from Chen. Senate Armed Services Committee source confirms Winters' promised demonstration will eliminate all doubt. Be careful. The implications were clear. Winters wasn't coming to Fort Irwin to participate in a fair evaluation. He was coming to ensure his system triumphed by whatever means necessary. Harrington pocketed his phone and descended from the observation platform. It was time to meet the tank crews who would be facing off against the most advanced autonomous weapon system ever designed. These men and women didn't know they were on the front lines of a battle for the future of American ground warfare, but their performance over the next 3 days would help determine the outcome. The briefing room was filled with the quiet confidence of experienced tank personnel. 4 full crews, 16 soldiers total, representing the best of the Armored Corps. Harrington recognized a few faces from his teaching days at Fort Knox, including Captain Maria Diaz, whose technical expertise with the Abrams fire control system was unmatched. "Attention," called the senior NCO as Harrington entered. "At ease," Harrington responded immediately. "Take your seats." As they settled, he studied their faces. Young and old, men and women, a cross-section of America's volunteer military. What united them was their mastery of the most complex land warfare system ever created, the main battle tank. "I won't waste time with pleasantries," Harrington began. "You've been selected for a critical comparative evaluation between the M1A3 Abrams and the Quantum Autonomous Drone System. The results will influence procurement decisions at the highest levels of the Pentagon." He activated the room's display screen, showing the testing grounds and protocols. 3 scenarios over 3 days. Day 1, desert warfare in open terrain. Day 2, urban combat in the Moab facility. Day 3, operations under electronic warfare conditions with degraded communications. Captain Diaz raised her hand. "Sir, what exactly are we facing?" The briefing materials mentioned drone swarms but provided few specifics. "A fair question." Harrington switched to technical specifications of the quantum system. The quantum swarm consists of 3 types of units working in coordination: scout drones for reconnaissance, striker drones armed with shaped charge weapons similar to Javelin missiles, and electronic warfare units designed to disrupt enemy communications while preserving their own network. "So we're fighting robots," remarked Sergeant First Class Jenkins, a veteran tank gunner with 3 combat tours. "Doesn't seem like a fair fight for them." A few chuckles rippled through the room, but Harrington remained serious. "Don't underestimate this system. In controlled tests, it's demonstrated impressive capabilities. The striker units can launch coordinated attacks from multiple vectors simultaneously. Their thermal signature is minimal, and they're programmed with advanced tactical algorithms drawn from historical tank battles." "Still just algorithms, sir," Jenkins persisted. "They can't improvise like a human crew." "That's what we're here to determine," Harrington replied, "whether human judgment and crew coordination can overcome technological advantages. The quantum system has superior mobility, multiple attack vectors, and doesn't risk human lives. We have superior firepower, protection, and the human element that's always been decisive in warfare." He paused, making eye contact with each crew member. "Make no mistake, this isn't just an evaluation exercise. This is a fight for the future of the Armored Corps. If these tests show that autonomous systems can consistently outperform crude tanks, the transition will accelerate. If we demonstrate the continuing value of human operators, it could preserve the tank's role in American ground forces for another generation." Captain Diaz leaned forward. "What are the rules of engagement, sir?" "Standard training parameters. The quantum units will be using simulated weapons, and your Abrams will be fitted with laser receivers to register hits. Penetration calculations will account for actual armor values versus drone munitions. If your tank is determined to be killed, you'll be required to power down and withdraw from the exercise." "And if we kill all their drones?" Jenkins asked with a hint of a smile. "Then you win that round," Harrington stated simply. "But don't expect it to be easy. These aren't the remote-controlled drones you might have encountered in previous exercises. The quantum system employs true artificial intelligence with learning capabilities. It adapts to your tactics in real time." He closed the briefing file and addressed them directly, no longer the detached commander, but the veteran tank officer speaking to his own. "You're representing more than yourselves or your units in these tests. You're representing every tank crew that has served, from the muddy battlefields of World War I to the deserts of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan. The Armored Corps has been the backbone of American ground warfare for a century. Whether it remains so for another century will depend in part on your performance over the next 3 days." The room had gone completely silent, the tankers absorbing the gravity of their assignment. "Questions?" Harrington asked. There were none. These professionals understood their mission. "Then prepare your vehicles. Testing begins at Aero 800 tomorrow. Dismissed." As the crews filed out, Captain Diaz lingered behind. "Something on your mind, Captain?" Harrington asked. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted. The scuttlebutt says you've made this personal, that you're fighting with Quantum's CEO over more than just military procurement." Harrington considered his response carefully. "This isn't personal, Captain. It's about ensuring we make decisions based on actual combat effectiveness, not corporate influence or technological infatuation. If the quantum system genuinely outperforms tanks in realistic conditions, I'll be the first to acknowledge it. Diaz nodded slowly. For what it's worth, sir, most of us who've served in tanks feel the same way. We're not opposed to new technology, but we've seen too many revolutionary systems fail when they meet reality. That perspective is exactly why these tests matter, Harrington replied. Whatever happens, give it your best. That's all I ask. We will, sir. Count on it. After Diaz departed, Harrington remained in the empty briefing room reviewing the test scenarios one more time. Everything looked correct on paper, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Winters had something planned that wouldn't be in any official protocol. His phone vibrated again. A message from Sarah Vasquez. Quantum text requesting last-minute changes to test parameters. Claims system optimization for desert conditions. Maxwell denied request. Harrington frowned. It was beginning already. If Winters couldn't rig the test in advance, he'd try to change the rules during execution. Fortunately, General Maxwell was running a clean operation. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. A young lieutenant entered, saluting crisply. Colonel Harrington, there's someone at the main gate asking for you. Says he's an old friend, a Mr. Carson. Harrington's expression remained neutral, but his mind raced. What was Bull Carson doing at Fort Irwin? The senator had been notably silent since the Washington committee meeting. Thank you, Lieutenant. Please tell security I'll be there shortly. As the officer departed, Harrington sent a quick encrypted message to Chen. Carson just arrived at Fort Irwin, unexpected. Her reply came seconds later. Careful, multiple quantum donations to his campaign fund last week. $500K total through various PACs. The implications were troubling. Was Carson here as Winters' proxy, or did he have another agenda? Only one way to find out. 20 minutes later, Harrington found his old friend waiting in a secure visitor's lounge near the base entrance. Carson looked tired, the lines in his face deeper than they had been in Washington. His prosthetic leg was visible below his khaki shorts, a titanium reminder of that desperate day in the Iraqi desert. Bull, Harrington greeted him with cautious warmth. Jim, Carson rose, extending his hand. Been a while. They shook hands, evaluating each other with the careful scrutiny of men who had once trusted each other implicitly, but now harbored doubts. Quite a surprise finding you here, Harrington remarked as they sat. The Armed Services Committee taking a sudden interest in our testing. No official visit, Carson replied. I'm here on my own time. Wanted to see this showdown for myself. And to talk to you, away from Washington. 500,000 reasons why. Harrington couldn't keep the edge from his voice. Carson's expression hardened. So you know about the campaign contributions. Are you having me investigated, Jim? Just staying informed about relevant financial connections. Quantum seems very generous to certain politicians. Politics requires funding, you know that. And funding creates obligation, I know that too. The tension between them was palpable. Decades of friendship straining under the weight of suspicion and diverging priorities. Carson sighed deeply. I didn't come here to fight with you. I came to warn you. About what? Winters. He's not playing by the rules, Jim. Never has. The man holds grudges and has resources you can't imagine. This test isn't just about military procurement for him, it's personal. Because of the friendly fire incident in Iraq? Carson looked surprised. You know about that? I know his unit suffered casualties from misidentified targets, supposedly coalition armor, though the records are conveniently vague. It was worse than the official report indicates, Carson said quietly. Winters watched 3 of his men die because a tank gunner misidentified their position. Made a crusade out of eliminating human error from the battlefield ever since. And made billions in the process, Harrington observed dryly. Convenient how his trauma aligned with profitable defense contracts. Don't underestimate his conviction, Carson warned, or what he's willing to do to win. My sources say he's prepared contingencies if the tests don't go as planned. What kind of contingencies? Carson hesitated. I don't have specifics, just whispers, but enough to concern me. Whatever history lies between us, Jim, I don't want to see you destroyed in this fight. Is that what's happening here, Bull? You've taken his money, but your conscience is bothering you? Color rose in Carson's face. You always were a self-righteous bastard. I've served this country for 30 years in uniform and in Congress. I don't need lectures about conscience from you or anyone else. Then why are you here? Harrington demanded. What's your stake in this? The anger drained from Carson as quickly as it had appeared. He suddenly looked older, wearier. Because despite everything, you're still my friend, and I owe you my life. He gestured to his prosthetic leg. I wouldn't be here if you hadn't pulled me from that tank. I've never forgotten that, even when we've been on opposite sides. The sincerity in Carson's voice cut through Harrington's suspicion. Whatever political games the senator was playing, this part was genuine. What exactly are you warning me about, Bull? What should I be watching for? Winters has a contingency plan if his system underperforms. Something about demonstrating real-world capabilities outside the test parameters. I don't know details, just that he's confident it will override any negative test results. Harrington frowned. That sounds like he's planning to violate test protocols. Probably. And he has allies at the Pentagon who will look the other way if the demonstration is impressive enough. Carson checked his watch. I should go. My being here is already raising questions I'd rather not answer. As he stood to leave, Harrington asked one last question. Where do you stand in all this, Bull? Really? Carson paused at the door. I still believe autonomous systems are the future of warfare, Jim, but I believe in fair competition and honest evaluation. Whatever happens here should be decided on merit, not manipulation. He offered a sad smile. Maybe I'm not as far gone as you thought. After Carson departed, Harrington immediately contacted his impromptu team, sharing the warning about Winter's contingency plan. None had specific intelligence on what it might involve, but all agreed to heighten their vigilance. The remainder of the day was consumed with final preparations. Harrington personally inspected each of the 4 Abrams tanks, checking their systems and speaking with the crews. These machines represented the culmination of decades of American engineering excellence, combining devastating firepower, exceptional protection, and mobility that belied their massive weight. But their greatest strength remained the 4 soldiers who operated each vehicle as a seamlessly coordinated team. As evening fell over the desert training grounds, Harrington found himself drawn to the maintenance bay where the tanks were receiving their final servicing. The familiar sounds and smells transported him back across the years, to his own days commanding iron beasts across foreign lands. Captain Diaz was there, running diagnostics on her tank's fire control system with methodical precision. Everything in order, Captain? Harrington asked, approaching her workstation. Yes, sir, just triple-checking the targeting alignment. In this kind of test, millimeters could make the difference between a kill and a miss. Harrington nodded appreciatively. Attention to detail, the mark of a good tank commander. Learn from the best, sir. She glanced up from her instruments. I had your tactics case study at Knox, Battle of 73 Easting, required reading for every tank officer worth their salt. The mention of that pivotal engagement stirred memories. That battle taught us many lessons about technology, tactics, and the human element in warfare. Permission to ask a personal question, sir? Go ahead. What was it like, being there, making those split-second decisions with lives hanging in the balance? Harrington was silent for a moment, searching for words that could capture the complex reality of combat leadership. Terrifying, he finally admitted, and clarifying. In combat, everything superfluous falls away. Your training takes over, your focus narrows to what matters, accomplishing the mission and bringing your people home alive. He ran his hand along the Abrams' armored hull, feeling the cold steel beneath his fingers. That's what machines will never understand. The weight of responsibility, the bond between warriors, the moral calculations that can't be reduced to algorithms. Diaz nodded thoughtfully. That's why we'll win tomorrow, sir. Because we understand something the drones never will. What we're fighting for. I hope you're right, Captain, Harrington replied. Get some rest. Tomorrow will test all of us. As he walked back to his temporary quarters under a sky ablaze with stars, Harrington's phone vibrated with a message from David. Surveillance detected unusual electronic signatures from Quantum Compound. Possible pre-test system modifications outside approved parameters. So it begins, Harrington thought. The chess match before the actual battle. He replied, monitor and document, don't intervene yet. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by memories of past battles and anticipation of the contest to come. When Harrington finally drifted off, he dreamed not of 73 Easting or other past glories, but of a future battlefield where machines fought machines, with humans mere observers to their own obsolescence. He woke before dawn, the desert air already warming with the promise of scorching heat to come. Perfect conditions for thermal imaging systems, both in the tank's sights and in the quantum drone's sensors. By 0730, he had joined General Maxwell in the Test Control Center, a hardened bunker equipped with monitoring systems to track every aspect of the upcoming evaluation. Multiple screens show different views of the testing grounds, aerial perspectives from observation aircraft, feeds from ground cameras positioned throughout the range, and direct links to cameras inside each Abrams tank. Quite the setup, Harrington remarked, surveying the technology. DoD spared no expense, Maxwell replied. Too much riding on these results. We've got representatives from the service chiefs, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and congressional oversight committees all watching remotely. And Winters? Maxwell nodded toward a separate monitoring station where the Quantum CEO sat surrounded by his technical team. Winters looked supremely confident, dressed casually but expensively in designer dessert wear, his attention divided between the displays and quiet conversations with his staff. At precisely 0800, Maxwell activated the command channel. All units, this is test control. Exercise Comparative Edge Phase 1 is now active. Confirm readiness status. The Abrams commanders reported in sequence, each tank positioned at designated starting points around the sprawling range. Quantum Command, confirm readiness status, Maxwell continued. Winters himself responded, his voice smooth and assured. Quantum Swarm System initialized and operational, all parameters nominal, ready to proceed. 2. Very well. Phase 1 test parameters are as follows. Desert warfare scenario, simulated OP4 equivalent to reinforced mechanized company. Abrams units will attempt to secure Objective Alpha, while Quantum Swarm provides equivalent force protection and assault capabilities on separate but comparable approach. Success measured by objective secured, time to completion, and survivability rates. Maxwell paused, then gave the command, execute Phase 1. I say again, execute Phase 1. On the screens, the Abrams tanks roared into motion, dust plumes rising behind them as they began their advance across the desert terrain. Simultaneously, dozens of quantum drones took to the air from their launch platforms, spreading out in a complex pattern that resembled a flock of predatory birds. Impressive coordination, Maxwell murmured, watching the quantum swarm's deployment. Harrington said nothing, his attention fixed on the tank formations. The 4 Abrams had adopted a classic wedge, maintaining optimal spacing for mutual support while presenting minimal target profile to potential threats. The first simulated enemy appeared 20 minutes into the exercise, remote-controlled vehicles representing hostile armor, strategically positioned behind ridgelines and in shallow depressions. Both the tanks and drones engaged these targets effectively, though with different approaches. The Abrams crews used terrain for cover, exposing themselves only long enough to acquire targets and fire before returning to concealment. The quantum drones employed swarming tactics, overwhelming enemy positions with multiple simultaneous attacks from different vectors. Both systems performing to expectation so far, Maxwell commented. Harrington nodded, but he was watching for something specific. The standard test scenario was challenging but predictable. What would happen when the unexpected occurred? He didn't have to wait long for an answer. 50 minutes into the exercise, the test controllers introduced an unannounced complication: simulated civilian vehicles entering the battle space. This was the kind of moral and tactical challenge that tested human judgment. The Abrams crews immediately adjusted their fire control, maintaining target awareness while carefully avoiding the civilian elements. The quantum system's response was less nuanced. Several drones continued their attack patterns, coming dangerously close to simulated civilian positions before belatedly adjusting their approach. Targeting discrimination issues, Harrington noted quietly. The AI recognizes the civilian elements but calculates acceptable risk differently than human operators. Winters overheard the comment and responded defensively. The system is prioritizing mission accomplishment while minimizing collateral damage risk. That's exactly what it's designed to do. And if those were real civilians, Harrington challenged, the system nearly engaged neutral elements. Nearly isn't the same as actually engaging, Winters countered. The risk assessment was correct based on mission parameters. General Maxwell intervened before the exchange could escalate. Save the analysis for the debriefing, gentlemen. We still have an exercise in progress. The test continued for another hour, with both systems demonstrating impressive capabilities against increasingly difficult opposition. By the conclusion of Phase 1, both the Abrams teams and the Quantum Swarm had secured their objectives with minimal simulated losses. The initial metrics showed a slight advantage to the quantum system in speed of execution, while the Abrams teams demonstrated superior targeting discrimination and ammunition efficiency. A draw, more or less, Maxwell summarized as the systems returned to base for evaluation and reset. Both platforms performed admirably in open terrain under optimal conditions. Winters appeared satisfied with the outcome, though not triumphant. "Wait until Phase 2 tomorrow," he remarked to his team, just loudly enough for Harrington to overhear. "Urban operations will showcase the swarm's true advantages." Harrington remained poker-faced, but inwardly he was concerned. The quantum system had performed better than he expected, adapting quickly to changing conditions and demonstrating impressive coordination. If the drone swarm could match that performance in the more complex urban environment, the case for maintaining the tank fleet would be significantly weakened. As the technical teams downloaded combat data for detailed analysis, Harrington stepped outside the control bunker, needing a moment away from the tension and politics. The desert heat hit him like a physical wall, but he welcomed it as a clarifying force, burning away the complexities and leaving only essential truths. His phone vibrated. "David, detected unauthorized communications between Quantum Command and drone units during civilian scenario. Possible manual override of autonomous functions." So that explained the swarm's recovery from its initial targeting confusion. Winters or his team had directly intervened, violating the test protocol requiring fully autonomous operation. "Can you prove it?" Harrington texted back. "Working on it. Signals were encrypted, but patterns suggest human input. Document everything. We'll need incontrovertible evidence." As Harrington pocketed his phone, he became aware of someone approaching. John Winters, looking remarkably comfortable despite the heat. Colonel Harrington. Winters greeted him with professional courtesy that didn't reach his eyes. "An interesting first round." "Indeed." Harrington maintained his military reserve. "Your system performed well. As did your tanks, particularly impressive targeting discrimination during the civilian scenario. Human judgment remains valuable in complex moral situations." Winters smiled thinly. "For now, our ethical algorithms are learning continuously. Soon they'll make better moral calculations than human operators under stress." "Better by whose definition?" Harrington challenged. "Moral judgment isn't a mathematical equation. Everything can be quantified, Colonel. Even ethics. It's simply a matter of assigning proper values to competing priorities." The fundamental philosophical divide between them couldn't have been clearer. Winters saw warfare as an engineering problem to be optimized. Harrington understood it as a human endeavor with dimensions that transcended calculation. "Tomorrow's urban test will be revealing," Winters continued, changing the subject. "The swarm's ability to operate in 3 dimensions, securing multiple buildings simultaneously, represents a capability tanks simply cannot match." "We'll see," Harrington replied neutrally. "Urban warfare has always favored infantry over vehicles of any kind. The question is whether your drones can coordinate with ground forces more effectively than tanks can." "Always looking backward, Colonel. That's the military's great limitation. You plan for the last war while we design for the next one." Winters glanced at his watch. "If you'll excuse me, I need to prepare my team for tomorrow's demonstration." As Winters walked away, Harrington couldn't shake the feeling that the Quantum CEO had emphasized the word demonstration intentionally. Combined with Carson's warning about contingency plans, it raised troubling possibilities. He immediately sought out General Maxwell, finding him reviewing preliminary data from the morning's test. "Tom, I need to speak with you privately." Maxwell recognized the seriousness in Harrington's tone and led him to a secure office away from the monitoring stations. "What's on your mind, Jim?" "I have reason to believe Winters may be planning something outside the approved test parameters. Possibly tomorrow during the urban phase." Maxwell frowned. "What kind of something?" "I'm not certain, but I've received credible information that he's prepared a contingency demonstration if the standard tests don't sufficiently showcase his system's capabilities." "From where? What source?" Harrington hesitated. Revealing Carson as his source could compromise the senator's position. "I can't disclose that right now, but I trust the information." Maxwell studied him for a long moment. "You're asking me to increase security measures based on an unnamed source and a vague warning? I'm asking you to be vigilant, to ensure that all systems operate exactly according to approved protocols tomorrow." "That's already my intention," Maxwell replied, a hint of offense in his tone. "This is a tightly controlled evaluation, not some corporate demonstration." "I understand, but Winters has billions riding on the outcome. People have bent rules for much less." Maxwell sighed. "I'll double the monitoring teams and review the technical safeguards. But Jim, if this is personal between you and Winters—" "It's not," Harrington insisted. "This is about ensuring a fair evaluation of systems that American lives will depend on." "All right, consider it done." Maxwell paused. "There's something else you should know. Your son requested access to our communications monitoring systems this morning. said he was conducting authorized electronic warfare evaluation. Harrington maintained his composure with effort. David hadn't mentioned this part of his plan. He has the necessary clearances, Harrington said carefully. An EW assessment is a legitimate component of the evaluation. I'm aware I approved his request, but it's unusual to have a helicopter pilot conducting signals intelligence work. David has cross-training in electronic warfare. It's valuable to have his perspective. Maxwell didn't seem entirely convinced, but he nodded. If you say so, just keep in mind, Jim, this whole process is under intense scrutiny from the highest levels. Any irregularities will be magnified. I understand the stakes, Tom, better than most. When Harrington left the control center, he immediately contacted David through their secure channel. Maxwell told me about your request for comms monitoring access. That wasn't part of the plan. Had to improvise, David replied. Standard monitoring wouldn't catch the kind of subtle interference I suspected. Needed direct access to the raw signals data. And did you find something? Enough to be suspicious, not enough to be conclusive. They're good, Dad. Using encrypted channels that look like system diagnostics unless you know exactly what to look for. Keep digging, but carefully. If Winters realizes we're onto him, he might accelerate whatever he's planning. The remainder of the day was devoted to detailed analysis of the Phase 1 results in preparation for the more complex urban warfare scenario scheduled for the following morning. Harrington divided his time between reviewing performance data with the tank crews and coordinating with his clandestine team of allies. By evening, a clearer picture had emerged. The quantum system had indeed performed impressively in open terrain, but evidence suggested human intervention during critical decision points, precisely what was prohibited under test protocols requiring fully autonomous operation. Sarah Vasquez confirmed through Pentagon contacts that Winters had been pressuring officials to modify the final evaluation criteria, emphasizing speed and lethality over discrimination and survivability metrics where tanks held advantages. Most concerning was Chen's report that Quantum had flown in additional equipment overnight, hardware not included in the original test plan. The official explanation involved diagnostic and monitoring systems, but Chen's sources suggested it might include enhanced drone variants not previously disclosed to evaluators. As night fell over the desert base, Harrington met with his son in a secluded maintenance shed away from the electronic surveillance that blanketed the main facilities. Tomorrow is critical, Harrington emphasized. The urban scenario is where Winters expects his system to demonstrate decisive superiority. David nodded, his expression serious. I've analyzed their performance today. The swarm's coordination was too perfect, especially after the civilian element was introduced. There's evidence of real-time human guidance supplementing the autonomous functions. Can you prove it definitively? Not yet. They've layered their communications security expertly, but I'm getting closer to cracking their methodology. Harrington paced the small space, thinking through the implications. If Winters is secretly controlling the drones while claiming they're autonomous, that's fraud. It undermines the entire premise of the system. Agreed, but proving it will be challenging, especially in the urban environment where signal density increases exponentially. Whatever they're planning, tomorrow will be their best opportunity. Then we need to be prepared for anything. Harrington paused, studying his son's face in the dim light. Despite their troubled history, in this moment, they were united by common purpose. I appreciate what you're doing, David. I know it's putting you in a difficult position professionally. David's expression softened slightly. You think I'm doing this for you? I'm doing it because the evidence suggests Winters is selling the Pentagon a system that doesn't work as advertised. That puts soldiers at risk, my friends, my colleagues. Either way, I'm grateful. An awkward silence fell between them, decades of tension impossible to dispel in a single moment of cooperation. Mom would be proud of you, Harrington said finally, standing up for what's right, regardless of personal cost. David's face tightened. Don't bring her into this. She's already in it. She's part of who we both are. You weren't there, David said quietly, the old accusation hanging between them, when she needed you most. I tried to be, Harrington responded, the familiar pain resurfacing. As soon as I knew how serious it was. 3 months, Dad. She fought for 3 months while you were halfway around the world. The Army wouldn't release me until she was terminal. You know that. I know you could have tried harder. David checked his watch. We should go. Separate exits, 15 minutes apart. I'll take north, you take south. As his son departed, Harrington remained in the shadowy shed, the weight of old grief pressing down alongside the urgency of present challenges. He had failed his wife when she needed him most. a fact no amount of military success could erase. Now, all these years later, he was fighting for a different kind of legacy, one that might, perhaps, begin to make amends for past failures. Dawn broke over Fort Irwin, revealing the Urban Operations Training Complex, a sprawling mock city constructed for practicing the most challenging form of modern warfare. Concrete buildings of various heights formed a realistic urban core, surrounded by industrial areas, residential zones, and transportation infrastructure. Hidden throughout were remote-controlled opposition forces, improvised explosive device simulations, and civilian role players. In this complex three-dimensional battle space, the comparative advantages and disadvantages of tanks versus drones would be starkly revealed. The Abrams' raw power and protection would be constrained by limited maneuverability in narrow streets, while the quantum drone's mobility and multiple attack vectors could be offset by signal interference from buildings and the challenge of discriminating between combatants and civilians in close quarters. From the elevated control center overlooking the complex, Harrington watched the final preparations with focused intensity. The 4 Abrams tanks were positioned at the southern approach to the mock city, their crews conducting last-minute systems checks. On the opposite side, the quantum launch platforms were being prepared, drone units undergoing pre-mission diagnostics. General Maxwell conducted the morning briefing with characteristic precision. Phase 2 parameters, urban warfare scenario. Objective to secure central administration building while minimizing collateral damage and civilian casualties. Opposition force distributed throughout the complex, with varying levels of resistance. Both systems will execute simultaneous but separate approaches from opposite sides of the complex. The observers and evaluators took their positions. Winters and his team occupied the same monitoring station as the previous day, their confidence visibly higher as they prepared for what they clearly expected to be a decisive demonstration of their system's advantages. At precisely 0800, Maxwell gave the command, "Execute Phase 2. The urban exercise began dramatically differently than the desert scenario. Where the open terrain had allowed for long-range observation and gradual engagement, the urban environment forced immediate close-quarters decision-making. The Abrams tanks advanced cautiously, maintaining mutual support as they entered the outskirts of the mock city. Their primary tactical challenge was immediately apparent: limited fields of fire, constrained maneuverability, and vulnerability to attacks from above. The quantum swarm adopted a radically different approach. The drones dispersed immediately, with scout units penetrating deep into the complex, while striker drones maintained overwatch positions above key intersections. Within minutes, they had established a three-dimensional surveillance grid that provided near-complete situational awareness. "Impressive deployment pattern," Maxwell commented, watching the quantum system's rapid securing of key nodes. Harrington nodded, but his attention was divided between the operational feeds and the communications monitoring being conducted by his son at a separate station. If Winters was again manually interfering with supposedly autonomous operations, David would be watching for the evidence. The first serious engagement occurred 20 minutes into the exercise, and Abrams, commanded by Captain Diaz, encountered simulated opposition forces in a market square. The tank's limited visibility in the cluttered urban space made target identification challenging, but the crew responded with disciplined restraint, using the coaxial machine gun rather than the main gun to minimize collateral damage. Simultaneously on the northern approach, quantum drones encountered a similar opposition group. Their response was notably different: a coordinated strike by multiple units that eliminated the threat efficiently, but with significantly more simulated structural damage and higher risk to nearby civilian elements. "Tactical philosophy divergence," Harrington observed to Maxwell. "The human crew prioritizes discrimination and minimal force. The AI prioritizes rapid threat elimination and mission advancement. Both approaches have merit," Maxwell replied neutrally. "Different risk calculations." As the exercise progressed, the differing tactical approaches became more pronounced. The tank crews advanced methodically, securing their sectors with minimal collateral effects, but at a slower pace. The quantum swarm moved rapidly, neutralizing threats with overwhelming force and accepting higher collateral damage as an operational trade-off. An hour into the exercise, the test controllers introduced the first major complication: a simulated school evacuation in the Central District, with role players representing children and teachers moving through the battle space. The Abrams crews immediately adjusted their operations, establishing security cordons, and in one case using the tank itself as a physical barrier to protect civilians from simulated hostile fire. The quantum system's response was less adaptive. Several drones continued their programmed assault patterns despite the civilian presence, necessitating last-minute course corrections that decreased their combat effectiveness. Harrington was watching this sequence closely when David's voice came through his earpiece. Confirmed manual override. They're directly controlling at least 6 units during the school scenario. Can you document it? Harrington subvocalized. Already done. Signal pattern is distinctive and corresponds exactly with course corrections. This was the evidence they needed. Proof that the quantum system's autonomous decision-making wasn't performing as advertised in complex moral scenarios, requiring human intervention while still being presented as fully autonomous. Harrington was considering how best to use this information when a disturbance at the quantum monitoring station caught his attention. Winters was engaged in an intense whispered conversation with his chief engineer, both men looking increasingly agitated as they studied a private data feed. Moments later, Winters approached General Maxwell directly. "General, we're detecting an unauthorized signal analysis of our command frequencies. Someone is attempting to penetrate our proprietary communications protocols." Maxwell frowned. "All monitoring is being conducted through approved channels, Mr. Winters. If you're concerned about signal security—" "This isn't standard monitoring," Winters interrupted. "This is targeted electronic intelligence gathering focused specifically on our command and control channels. It constitutes industrial espionage against Quantum's proprietary technology." Maxwell's gaze shifted to Harrington, a question in his eyes. Harrington maintained a neutral expression, but inwardly he was calculating rapidly. If Winters had detected David's signal's intelligence work, the entire operation might be compromised. "I'll investigate immediately," Maxwell assured Winters. "In the meantime, the exercise continues according to protocol." Winters returned to his station, but the tension in the control center had increased palpably. Harrington used the moment to send a coded alert to David, Red Wolf, their prearranged signal to secure all gathered evidence and cease active monitoring. The exercise continued for another hour, with both systems advancing toward the central objective. The Abrams tanks had successfully cleared their approach sectors with minimal collateral damage, but had fallen behind the planned timeline due to their cautious advance. The quantum swarm had secured key positions throughout the complex, but had incurred higher simulated civilian casualties and structural damage. As the operation approached its climax, the securing of the Central Administration Building, Harrington noticed increased activity at the quantum monitoring station. Winters and his team were engaged in rapid, intense communications, with several engineers making adjustments to their control systems. David's voice came through Harrington's earpiece again. "Something's happening. New signal patterns emerging from their command center, not consistent with approved test protocols." Before Harrington could respond, the situation on the ground changed dramatically. A new type of drone, larger and more heavily armed than those previously deployed, launched from the quantum staging area. It wasn't part of the approved test inventory. "General," Harrington called out, pointing to the monitoring screen. "Unauthorized system entering the test area." Maxwell immediately activated the command channel. "Quantum Command, you have an unauthorized platform in the exercise area. Stand down immediately." Winters responded with practiced calm. "General, this is a contingency demonstration unit designed to show the full capabilities of our system in urban environments. The standard test parameters are too limiting to showcase the technology's true potential." "That's not your call to make, Mr. Winters. This is a controlled military evaluation, not a corporate sales pitch. Stand down the unauthorized unit now." "With respect, General, the Defense Secretary and Joint Chiefs have authorized this demonstration. Perhaps check your priority communications." Maxwell turned to his communications officer, who was already reviewing an incoming message. The officer's expression confirmed what Winters had claimed. Authorization had indeed come from the highest levels, bypassing the standard chain of command. "Confirmation received," Maxwell acknowledged grimly. "But this changes the evaluation parameters significantly." "That's the point, General," Winters replied, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. "Some capabilities can't be properly evaluated within artificial constraints." Harrington watched with growing alarm as the new drone unit moved directly toward the position occupied by Captain Diaz's tank. This wasn't just a demonstration, it was a direct challenge. A technological David versus a mechanical Goliath. "What's that unit armed with?" Harrington demanded. "Advanced kinetic penetrator," Winters answered. designed specifically to defeat modern tank armor. Don't worry, Colonel, it's using simulated weapons like everything else. But the targeting and delivery systems are fully operational. The implications were clear. Winters wasn't content to compete within the established parameters. He wanted a decisive, dramatic victory that would capture headlines and influence procurement decisions, regardless of the overall test results. On the command channel, Captain Diaz's voice came through clearly. Control Badger 1, unidentified aerial vehicle approaching my position at high speed. Request guidance. Maxwell hesitated, caught between conflicting authorities. Badger 1, be advised the UAV is part of an authorized demonstration. Maintain current operations but exercise heightened awareness. Copy that, Diaz acknowledged. Continuing mission. Harrington moved closer to Maxwell, speaking urgently but quietly. Tom, this is completely irregular. That unit hasn't undergone the same verification as the test systems. We have no idea what it's actually capable of or how it's being controlled. I understand your concerns, Maxwell replied equally quietly, but the authorization comes directly from the secretary. My hands are tied. At least warn Diaz what she's facing. That would compromise the evaluation parameters. Her response to an unknown threat is part of what's being assessed. Harrington watched helplessly as the demonstration played out on the monitoring screens. The advanced quantum drone took up a position directly above the urban canyon where Diaz's tank was advancing. From this vantage point, it had a perfect firing angle against the Abrams' thinner top armor, precisely the vulnerability that had concerned tank commanders since the first anti-armor helicopters appeared on the battlefield. What happened next occurred with stunning rapidity. The drone initiated what appeared to be a standard targeting sequence, its systems locking onto the tank below. But instead of a simulated weapon discharge, something unexpected occurred. The drone's electronic warfare package activated, flooding the local area with a high-powered jamming signal. Immediately, Diaz's communications cut out. The tank's systems flickered as electronic interference disrupted its operational capabilities. This wasn't part of any approved test scenario. What the hell is happening? Maxwell demanded, turning to Winters. The Quantum CEO maintained his composure. A realistic demonstration of electronic warfare capabilities against armored vehicles. The modern battlefield isn't just about kinetic effects, General. This exceeds authorized parameters, Maxwell insisted. Deactivate the EW systems immediately. The demonstration will conclude momentarily, Winters replied, making no move to comply. On the screen, Diaz's tank had come to a complete stop, its electrical systems compromised by the intensive jamming. The tank was effectively neutralized without a single simulated shot being fired. Exactly the dramatic demonstration Winters had wanted. But then something unexpected happened. Despite the electronic attack, the Abrams turret began to move, tracking the drone above it. The tank's main gun elevated to maximum angle. Impossible, one of Winters' engineers exclaimed. Their fire control should be completely disabled by the jamming. Harrington allowed himself a small smile. Manual backup systems. Every Abrams has them. When electronics fail, human ingenuity adapts. The tank fired. Its simulated round registered as a direct hit on the quantum drone despite the electronic warfare assault. On the evaluation system, both platforms were shown as mutually destroyed. The drone had theoretically disabled the tank's systems, but not before the tank had fired its kill shot. A draw, not the decisive victory Winters had choreographed. The Quantum CEO's face darkened with anger. That's not a realistic outcome. No human gunner could calculate a firing solution that quickly under those conditions. Apparently Captain Diaz could, Harrington countered. That's the human factor you keep discounting, Mr. Winters. Adaptability, intuition, the will to survive and win regardless of technological disadvantage. Before Winters could respond, General Maxwell intervened. Phase 2 is officially concluded. All units returned to base positions for evaluation and debriefing. As the exercise wound down, the tension in the control center remained palpable. Winters and his team huddled in intense discussion, clearly unhappy with the demonstration's outcome. Maxwell was engaged with his communications officer, presumably receiving guidance from the Pentagon about how to handle the irregular demonstration. Harrington used the moment to contact David. Status? Secure. All evidence preserved, including full documentation of the unauthorized EW attack. They crossed a line, Dad. That jamming could have damaged actual tank systems, not just the simulation interfaces. Exactly what Winters wanted. A decisive demonstration of drone superiority, regulations be damned. There's more, David continued. During the jamming, I detected a secondary signal pattern targeting the tank's actual control systems, not just the simulation overlay. If Diaz hadn't switched to manual backup, they might have caused a real malfunction. Harrington felt cold anger rising. That goes beyond breaking test protocols. It's recklessly endangering personnel. I've secured all the technical evidence. It's irrefutable. Good work. Stand by for next steps. As the morning's dramatic events transitioned to afternoon analysis, Harrington sought out Captain Diaz, finding her and her crew running diagnostics on their tank systems. Impressive shooting up there, Captain, especially under electronic attack. Diaz looked up from her work, a mix of pride and concern in her expression. Thank you, sir. That wasn't in the briefing materials. No, it wasn't. Winters took some creative liberties with the test parameters. She nodded toward her tank. Nearly fried our electronics. We've got warning lights on systems that shouldn't have been affected by simulation interfaces. Whatever they hit us with, it was military-grade EW, not testing equipment. I suspected as much. How did you manage the targeting solution without your fire control system? A hint of a smile crossed Diaz's face. Old school, sir. Mechanical backup sites and dead reckoning. My gunner, Specialist Lee, spent 2 years in analog gunnery before the digital systems were installed. Said it was like riding a bicycle. Harrington felt a surge of pride. This was exactly what he had been fighting for. The irreplaceable human element that no autonomous system could replicate. When technology failed, training, experience, and determination had prevailed. Your crew performed admirably, Captain. That tank up there was supposed to be Quantum's decisive trump card. You just proved that human operators still have a place on the battlefield. Thank you, sir. But I'm concerned about tomorrow's test. If they're willing to pull this kind of stunt in a controlled exercise, I understand your concern. Rest assured I'm addressing it at the highest levels. Leaving Diaz to her work, Harrington returned to the command center, where he found General Maxwell in heated discussion with Pentagon officials via secure video link. He waited until the call concluded before approaching. Tom, we need to talk about what happened out there. Maxwell looked exhausted, the lines in his face deeper than they had been that morning. Already handled, Jim. The Secretary has officially reprimanded Quantum for exceeding test parameters, but the demonstration results will still be included in the final evaluation. That's unacceptable. They deliberately violated protocols, endangered personnel, and attempted to manipulate the outcome. I agree, but the decisions have been made above our pay grades. Maxwell lowered his voice. Politics and money, Jim. Quantum has powerful allies and even more powerful lobbyists. The fix was in before we ever started these tests. Then why bother with the charade at all? Optics. They needed to show they gave the tank a fair shot before relegating it to history. Maxwell sighed heavily. Look, I don't like it any more than you do, but our job is to execute the evaluation as directed, document the results objectively, and let the chain of command make the final decisions. Even if those decisions are based on manipulated data and rigged demonstrations? What would you have me do? Declare the tests invalid and be immediately replaced by someone more compliant? Harrington had no ready answer. Maxwell was right about the political realities. Direct confrontation within the military hierarchy would likely prove futile. At least ensure tomorrow's electronic warfare scenario is conducted strictly according to protocol, Harrington urged. No last-minute demonstrations or unauthorized systems. I'll do what I can, Maxwell promised. But after today, I'm not sure how much control I actually have over this process. The remainder of the day was consumed with technical debriefs, system repairs, and preparation for the final and most challenging phase of testing. Harrington divided his time between supporting the tank crews and coordinating with his clandestine team, compiling the evidence of Quantum's manipulation of the test process. By evening, a comprehensive dossier had been assembled. Documentation of manual overrides of supposedly autonomous systems, unauthorized communications during critical decision points, the deployment of unapproved hardware, and most damning, the recklessly aggressive electronic attack that had endangered personnel and equipment. In his temporary quarters, Harrington reviewed this evidence with David, Chen, and Vasquez via secure connection. This is definitively proves fraud, Chen assessed. Winters has been presenting his system as fully autonomous when in fact it requires human guidance in complex scenarios. And today's electronic warfare demonstration crossed from unethical into potentially illegal. The question is how to use this information effectively, Vasquez added. Going through official channels won't work. Winters has too many allies in the Pentagon and Congress. We need maximum visibility, Chen suggested. A public revelation that can't be buried or ignored. That carries significant risk, Harrington cautioned. For all of us, military careers, security clearances, professional reputations, all could be damaged by going public with classified test data. What's the alternative? David challenged. Let Winters get away with fraud that will endanger soldiers' lives? That's not the officer I know you to be, Dad. The implied respect in his son's words affected Harrington more deeply than he expected. Despite their troubled relationship, David still believed in his fundamental integrity. You're right, Harrington acknowledged, but we need to be strategic. Timing and venue are critical. They discussed various approaches, weighing risks and potential impact. Eventually, a plan emerged. They would wait until after the final test phase when all the evidence was complete. Then, rather than going public immediately, they would approach key members of the Senate Armed Services Committee directly, particularly those not already influenced by Quantum's lobbying efforts. Senator Martinez has been skeptical of the tank replacement program from the beginning, Chen noted, and he has no financial ties to Quantum or its subsidiaries. Carson might help as well, Harrington added, surprising the others. Despite everything, I believe he still puts country above politics when it matters most. The strategy session continued late into the night, refining their approach and preparing for all contingencies. By the time they concluded, a comprehensive plan was in place, one that would require perfect execution and perhaps a measure of luck, but offered the best chance of ensuring the future of American armored warfare would be decided on merit rather than manipulation. As the others signed off, David remained on the secure line with his father. There's something I've been meaning to ask you, David said hesitantly. Something I've wondered for years. Go ahead. If you had to choose again between being with Mom when she was sick and fulfilling your military obligations, what would you do? The question struck at the heart of their estrangement, the painful choice that had defined their relationship for decades. Harrington considered his answer carefully. I would choose your mother, he said finally. Every time, the Army would have continued without me. But Catherine, I lost something irreplaceable by not being there when she needed me most. David was silent for a long moment. I believe you, he said quietly. I'm not sure I can forgive you yet, but I believe you. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a small bridge across the chasm that had separated them for so long. Get some rest, Harrington advised. Tomorrow will test all of us. As David disconnected, Harrington remained awake, staring at the ceiling of his sparse quarters. The final phase of testing, operations under electronic warfare conditions with degraded communications, would be the most challenging yet. It would also be the scenario where the quantum system was most vulnerable, its dependence on secure data links a potential Achilles heel. Winters would know this. After today's unexpected draw, the Quantum CEO would be determined to secure a decisive victory in the final phase. What measures would he take to ensure that outcome? And how far would he go to protect the billions at stake? These questions followed Harrington into uneasy sleep, where his dreams were filled with tanks and drones engaged in silent combat across an electronic battlefield, the fate of warfare's future hanging in the balance. Dawn broke over Fort Irwin with ominous clouds gathering on the horizon, a rare weather system pushing in from the Pacific. The meteorologists had predicted clear skies for the final day of testing, but nature had other plans. Colonel James Harrington stood at the window of his quarters, watching lightning flash in the distance. The approaching storm seemed a fitting backdrop for what promised to be the most challenging and consequential phase of Operation Comparative Edge. His secure phone vibrated with a message from Rebecca Chen. Martinez confirmed for emergency hearing tomorrow if evidence holds. Carson still uncommitted. Harrington acknowledged the update with a brief response, then prepared for the day ahead. Everything now hinged on the electronic warfare scenario, where both systems would operate under conditions of degraded communications and active jamming. Theoretically, this environment should reveal the quantum system's greatest vulnerability, its dependence on networked communications for coordinated operations. But after yesterday's unauthorized demonstration, Harrington harbored no illusions about Winters playing by the rules. The Quantum CEO had proven his willingness to bend protocols and manipulate outcomes. Today, with everything at stake, he would likely push even further. The command center was unusually tense when Harrington arrived. General Maxwell was engaged in a heated discussion with his weather officer while Winters and his team huddled around their monitoring stations, faces grim. Problem? Harrington asked as Maxwell concluded his conversation. Weather's turning, forecasting severe thunderstorms within 2 hours, possibly earlier. Maxwell gestured toward the radar display. Electrical activity, high winds, potential flash flooding in the low-lying areas of the range. Will it affect the test schedule? It shouldn't. Electronic warfare testing can proceed in adverse weather. In fact, it adds another layer of realism. Maxwell lowered his voice. Though Winters is pushing for postponement, claims the conditions will unfairly disadvantage his system. Harrington raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Yesterday he was all about realistic battlefield conditions. Today he wants perfect weather? Exactly what I pointed out. The request was denied. Maxwell checked his watch. Briefing in 5 minutes. Whether or not, we're proceeding as scheduled. The test commanders assembled around the central display as Maxwell outlined the day's parameters. Phase 3. Operations under electronic warfare conditions with degraded communications. Both systems will navigate a combined course featuring desert and urban elements while subjected to simulated enemy jamming. Primary objective is to maintain effective combat operations despite electromagnetic interference. He continued with the specific technical details: jamming frequencies, intensity levels, and progression patterns. The electronic warfare environment would begin with subtle interference and gradually increase to complete communications blackout, forcing both systems to adapt to progressively challenging conditions. Questions? Maxwell concluded. Captain Diaz spoke up. Sir, after yesterday's unauthorized electronic attack, what assurances do we have that today's jamming will conform to safety protocols? The question hung in the air, directing attention toward Winters, who responded with practiced corporate smoothness. Captain, yesterday's demonstration was fully authorized by the Defense Secretary, though admittedly outside standard test parameters. Today's operations will strictly follow established protocols. Quantum has no interest in endangering personnel or equipment. The assurance sounded hollow after yesterday's events, but Maxwell nodded firmly. All electronic warfare systems have been verified by independent technical staff. No unauthorized frequencies or power levels will be permitted. As the briefing concluded, Harrington noticed his son entering the command center, moving directly to the electronic monitoring station he had been operating throughout the tests. David looked tired but focused, nodding briefly toward his father before immersing himself in technical preparations. The tank crews departed to their vehicles while Winters' team made final adjustments to their drone systems. Outside, the sky had darkened considerably, the approaching storm front moving faster than predicted. Distant thunder rolled across the desert, a low counterpoint to the mechanical preparations below. General Maxwell activated the command channel at precisely 0800. All units, this is test control. Exercise Comparative Edge Phase 3 is now active. Electronic warfare conditions will initiate in 3 minutes. Confirm readiness status. The 4 Abrams commanders reported in sequence, each tank positioned at its designated starting point. The Quantum team confirmed their readiness with similar precision. Very well, Maxwell continued. Phase 3 test parameters are as follows. Combined desert and urban navigation course with progressive electronic interference. Level 1 jamming commences in 3, 2, 1, mark. On the monitoring screens, subtle static appeared in communications channels as the first layer of electronic interference activated. Both systems initially showed no signs of degradation, proceeding smoothly through the early stages of the course. Nominal performance across all platforms, reported the electronic warfare officer, increasing to level 2 jamming in 30 seconds. The second level of interference introduced more significant disruption. The tank crew's communications became intermittent, forcing them to rely on pre-established protocols and visual signaling. The Quantum swarm showed its first signs of coordination difficulty, with several units momentarily losing formation before recovering. Interesting, Harrington murmured to Maxwell. Their recovery pattern suggests automated contingency protocols rather than true adaptation. Agreed, Maxwell replied quietly. Let's see how they handle level 3. The third level of electronic interference arrived with dramatic effect. Tank communications became largely unintelligible, reduced to occasional fragments through the heavy static. The Abrams crews responded by shifting to alternative channels and eventually to visual signaling, maintaining basic tactical coordination despite the communications breakdown. The Quantum system initially appeared more severely impacted, with drone formations briefly dissolving into seemingly random patterns. But within minutes, they reorganized with surprising effectiveness. adopting new formations that maintain operational capability despite the jamming. That's not right, David's voice came suddenly over Harrington's private channel. Their recovery shouldn't be possible under this level of interference. Explain, Harrington subvocalized. They're using frequencies outside the test parameters. I'm detecting communications that should be completely blocked by the current jamming pattern. Before Harrington could respond, the EW officer announced, proceeding to level 4 jamming, maximum interference across all standard military frequencies. The command center screens flickered as the most intense electronic warfare environment activated. The tank crews, already operating with minimal communications, shifted to completely autonomous operations, each vehicle proceeding according to pre-briefed contingencies while maintaining visual awareness of adjacent units. The quantum swarm, however, displayed only minimal disruption. While individual drones occasionally broke formation, the overall system continued to function with remarkable coordination. Sir, the EW officer addressed Maxwell with confusion evident in his voice. Quantum units are maintaining coordination patterns that shouldn't be possible under current jamming conditions. Winters interjected smoothly. Our proprietary communications protocol includes advanced frequency hopping and signal processing capabilities specifically designed to function in contested electromagnetic environments. Those capabilities weren't included in your technical specifications for this test, Maxwell pointed out. Military necessity, Winters replied with practiced ease. Some technological details remain classified even in evaluation settings. I'm sure you understand. David's voice returned in Harrington's earpiece, urgent now. They're cheating, Dad. They've deployed micro-relay stations throughout the test range, creating a secondary communications network operating on frequencies outside the test parameters. I'm tracking the signals now. Can you prove it definitively? Yes, I've triangulated 3 relay positions already. They're using millimeter wave transmission to avoid conventional jamming. This was the smoking gun they needed, concrete proof of deliberate test manipulation. But how to use it without revealing their own unauthorized monitoring? The answer came from an unexpected source. As the exercise progressed into its most challenging phase, the approaching storm arrived in full force. Lightning slashed across the darkened sky, followed by a deafening thunderclap that rattled the command center windows. Heavy rain began pelting the test range, reducing visibility and adding yet another layer of complexity to the operation. Weather system moving in faster than predicted, reported the meteorological officer. Electrical activity increasing significantly. Recommend exercise pause until storm passes. Maxwell considered the recommendation, then shook his head. Continue operations. Both systems should be hardened against environmental interference. This adds valuable realism to the scenario. The decision proved immediately consequential. A powerful lightning strike hit somewhere on the north side of the range, temporarily disrupting power to portions of the command center. When systems restored seconds later, the monitoring screen showed something remarkable. While the Abrams tanks continued their operations unaffected, the quantum swarm had abruptly lost cohesion, individual units hovering erratically or landing in apparent confusion. What's happening? Maxwell demanded, turning to Winters. The Quantum CEO was engaged in rapid communication with his engineering team, his corporate composure cracking visibly. Temporary system anomaly, restoring normal operations now. But normal operations did not resume. The swarm remained disorganized, individual units either grounded or moving without apparent coordination. David's voice came through Harrington's earpiece again, triumphant this time. The lightning took out their relay network. They can't re-establish their secondary communications under these conditions. Winters turned to Maxwell, abandoning pretense. General, we need to suspend the exercise immediately. These weather conditions are interfering with critical systems. Your systems are supposed to be hardened against environmental factors, Maxwell replied evenly. The tanks are continuing operations without issue. This is different. The electrical storm is creating interference patterns we couldn't reasonably prepare for. Battlefield conditions are rarely ideal, Mr. Winters. Your system's vulnerability to environmental factors is precisely what this evaluation aims to assess. As they argued, Harrington noticed a subtle shift in the remaining operational drone's behavior. Instead of the erratic movements displayed immediately after the lightning strike, several units appeared to be regaining coordination, converging toward a specific location on the range. David noticed it too. They're switching to manual control, direct line-of-sight operation from their command trailer. Limited capability, but enough to salvage something from this failure. Harrington watched as the remaining functional drones formed a concentrated attack group, moving directly toward the position occupied by Captain Diaz's tank, which had advanced furthest into the course. This wasn't random. It was a deliberate attempt to score at least one decisive victory amid the system's overall failure. General Harrington spoke up. Quantum appears to be concentrating remaining assets against Badger 1. Potential safety concern, given yesterday's incident. Maxwell studied the tactical display with narrowed eyes. Agreed. Quantum Command, distribute your operational units across the engagement area. Concentrated force against a single target violates test protocols. Winters made no move to comply, instead intensifying communications with his technical team. On the monitoring screens, the drone concentration continued its advance toward Diaz's position, now clearly visible despite the heavy rain. Final warning, Maxwell stated firmly. Redistribute your assets or I will terminate this exercise. When no response came, Maxwell made the call. All units, this is test control. Exercise terminated effective immediately. Return to base positions. Acknowledge. The tank units acknowledged promptly, but the quantum drones maintained their course, now just seconds from Diaz's position. They're ignoring the termination order, Harrington observed tensely. Quantum Command, your units are violating direct orders. Maxwell's voice hardened. Stand down immediately or face consequences. At that moment, Captain Diaz's voice broke through the static. Control Badger 1, multiple hostile drones approaching my position at attack velocity, engaging defensive measures. On screen, her tank pivoted smoothly, bringing its main gun to bear on the approaching swarm. The turret tracked with precision despite the driving rain and electronic interference, a testament to the crew's training and determination. Badger 1, hold fire, Maxwell ordered. Repeat, hold fire. Exercise terminated. But the drones continued their approach, now clearly on an attack vector. Whether through malfunction or deliberate action, they represented a genuine threat to Diaz's vehicle and crew. Control, they're not responding to IFF challenges, Diaz reported, a new edge in her voice. Request permission to engage with active countermeasures. Maxwell hesitated for just a moment, then made his decision. Permission granted, Badger 1, deploy countermeasures only. The tank's defensive systems activated immediately, launching a coordinated response of smoke, chaff, and directed electromagnetic pulse designed to disrupt attacking electronics without causing permanent damage. The effect on the approaching drones was immediate and dramatic. Several units faltered mid-flight, while others veered off course, their coordination shattered. What the hell are you doing? Winters demanded, abandoning all pretense of corporate decorum. You're destroying proprietary technology. Your units ignored a direct termination order and continued aggressive action against our personnel, Maxwell replied coldly. Consider yourself fortunate that I authorized defensive measures only, rather than direct fire. On the screens, Diaz's tank completed its defensive action, the drone threat neutralized without a single shot fired. The remaining quantum units had either landed or retreated to a safe distance, their attack formation completely disrupted. This exercise is officially concluded, Maxwell announced, his authority absolute. All personnel will report for immediate debriefing. Mr. Winters, I expect a full technical explanation for your system's failure to comply with the termination order. Winters' face had transformed from corporate confidence to barely controlled rage. This entire test has been compromised. The weather conditions, the tank crew's foreknowledge of our capabilities after yesterday's demonstration, the suspicious electronic monitoring of our communications, none of this constitutes a fair evaluation. That's rich coming from you, Harrington couldn't resist commenting. After your unauthorized demonstrations, hidden relay networks, and just now a direct violation of termination orders. Winters turned on him with cold fury. You know nothing about what you're saying, Colonel. I know enough to recognize when someone's manipulating test results to protect a $30 billion contract, Harrington replied evenly. Your system failed today under realistic conditions that any military technology must be prepared to face. This isn't over, Winters promised quietly. Not by a long shot. As the Quantum CEO stormed out with his team, Maxwell turned to Harrington with a weary expression. You just made a powerful enemy, Jim. He was already my enemy. Today just made it official. What's this about hidden relay networks? Do you have evidence of test manipulation beyond what we all just witnessed? Harrington hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Enough to warrant a full investigation by the Armed Services Committee, but I'd rather brief you privately given the sensitivity. Maxwell studied him for a long moment, then nodded. My office, 1 hour. Bring whatever you have. As the command center cleared, Harrington connected with David at the monitoring station. Good work tracking those relays. Your evidence was crucial. David nodded, a rare half-smile breaking through his professional demeanor. I've secured everything. Signal patterns, relay locations, the entire unauthorized communications network. They bypassed the test parameters completely, Dad. It's fraud, plain and simple. And when the lightning knocked out their network, the whole system fell apart, Harrington observed. Exactly the kind of vulnerability we've been concerned about. It's worse than that. The drones that continued toward Diaz's tank weren't malfunctioning. They were under direct manual control from the Quantum Command trailer. Winters deliberately ignored the termination order, trying to salvage something from the failure. He's desperate, Harrington concluded. The entire quantum business model depends on this contract. Without it, they collapse. So what's our next move? I briefed Maxwell in an hour. After that, we execute the plan. Senate Armed Services Committee tomorrow. With all the evidence we've gathered, Martinez will ensure a fair hearing. David's expression sobered. Winters won't go down without a fight. He has too much at stake. Which is why we need to move quickly. Have Chen and Vasquez ready with their portions of the evidence. We'll need a comprehensive presentation that even the most technologically challenged senator can understand. As they concluded their conversation, Harrington's phone vibrated with a message from an unexpected source. Senator Carson. Need to meet. Critical information. Your quarters, 30 minutes. Harrington showed this message to his son. What do you think? Can he be trusted? David considered the question seriously. Hard to say. His actions have been contradictory throughout this process, but if he has information we can use. I'll meet him, but not alone. Stay nearby, just in case. Harrington returned to his quarters to prepare for the meeting, gathering the key evidence David had collected along with Chen and Vasquez's supporting documentation. As he organized the materials, a knock came at his door. Carson stood outside, looking more haggard than he had the previous day. The confident political facade had cracked, revealing the weary combat veteran beneath. Thanks for seeing me, Carson said as Harrington invited him in. What happened out there today? It changes everything. Winter's system failed under realistic conditions, Harrington stated simply. Exactly what we predicted would happen. It's worse than that, Carson lowered his voice despite the privacy of the quarters. Quantum's entire financial structure is built on this contract. They've leveraged everything, betting on Pentagon approval. After today's failure, their stock is in free fall. Winters is facing not just professional embarrassment, but potential financial ruin. That makes him dangerous. Exactly. Carson glanced around nervously. He's already making calls, trying to have the test results classified as a security matter, pressuring Pentagon contacts to invalidate the entire evaluation. He won't succeed, Harrington said confidently. Too many witnesses, too much documentation. Maxwell won't bend the truth, regardless of political pressure. Don't be naive, Jim. Maxwell follows orders like any good soldier. If those orders come from high enough up the chain, he'll comply. Carson leaned forward. That's why I'm here. To warn you that Winters is planning something drastic before you can present your evidence to the Senate committee. What kind of something? I don't know specifics, just that he mentioned ensuring Harrington's evidence never reaches the committee. Take that however you want, but I'd watch my back if I were you. Harrington studied his old friend's face, searching for deception. Why are you telling me this, Bull? You've backed Quantum throughout this process, taken their campaign contributions, supported their proposals. Because some things matter more than politics or money. Carson's voice dropped, becoming more personal. You saved my life in Iraq, Jim. I've never forgotten that. And despite our differences, I know you're fighting for what you believe is right. The safety of our soldiers on future battlefields. The sincerity in Carson's voice was unmistakable. Whatever political games he had played throughout this process, this warning came from the man Harrington had pulled from a burning tank 30 years ago, not the calculating senator he had become. What's your stake in this now? Harrington asked. Where do you stand? I'm recusing myself from all quantum-related matters, citing conflict of interest. It's not much, but it's something. Carson stood, preparing to leave. Just be careful, Jim. Secure your evidence. Watch your surroundings. Winters isn't just fighting for a contract anymore. He's fighting for survival. After Carson departed, Harrington immediately contacted his team, implementing additional security measures for their evidence and themselves. David arranged secure cloud backup of all digital materials. Chen prepared a dead man protocol that would release key findings to multiple media outlets if anything happened to prevent their Senate testimony. For the briefing with General Maxwell, Harrington brought only summaries, keeping the primary evidence secure. He found the general in his office, reviewing the day's test results with a troubled expression. "It's worse than it looked in real time," Maxwell said without preamble. "The quantum system didn't just fail under adverse conditions. It actually violated basic safety protocols when it continued attacking after the termination order." "That's consistent with what we've discovered," Harrington replied, laying out his summary documents. "Winters has been manipulating this entire evaluation process, from falsified autonomy capabilities to hidden communication networks operating outside test parameters." Maxwell reviewed the materials with growing concern. "This constitutes fraud against the Department of Defense. Criminal charges could apply. Which is why we've arranged to present our complete findings to the Senate Armed Services Committee tomorrow. Senator Martinez has called an emergency hearing." "That explains the calls I've been receiving from the Secretary's office," Maxwell remarked. "Pressure to classify all test results pending national security review. Now I understand why." "Will you support the investigation?" Harrington asked directly. "Your testimony would be invaluable." Maxwell considered the question carefully. "I'll testify to what I personally observed. The rest is beyond my direct knowledge." He gestured to Harrington's summary documents. "But I won't impede your efforts to present this evidence. The integrity of our procurement process matters too much to allow political or corporate interests to compromise it." "Thank you, Tom. That's all I can ask." As Harrington prepared to leave, Maxwell added, "Watch yourself, Jim. Men like Winters don't accept defeat gracefully, especially with billions at stake." "So I've been warned." Harrington spent the remainder of the day coordinating final preparations with his team. The plan was set. They would depart Fort Irwin early the next morning, traveling separately to Washington for the Senate hearing scheduled for 1400 hours. Each carried a portion of the evidence, with redundant backups ensuring no single point of failure could compromise their case. As evening fell, the storm that had disrupted the day's testing finally passed, leaving behind a wash-clean desert sky brilliant with stars. Harrington stood outside his quarters, breathing the rain-freshened air and contemplating the significance of what they had witnessed and documented. The failure of the quantum system under realistic conditions didn't mean autonomous warfare had no place on future battlefields. Rather, it demonstrated that human judgment, adaptability, and moral reasoning remained essential components of effective military operations. The future likely included both crewed vehicles and autonomous systems, each complementing the other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. His phone vibrated with a message from Captain Diaz. "Crew debriefing complete, all systems restored after countermeasures deployment. Ready to support tomorrow if needed." "Well done today," Harrington replied. "Your performance validated everything we've been fighting for." A second message arrived from David. "All evidence secured, travel arrangements confirmed, meeting you at Senate office at 1300 tomorrow." Everything was in place for the final phase of their mission, exposing the truth about quantum's deception and ensuring the future of American armored warfare would be decided based on genuine combat effectiveness rather than corporate manipulation. Harrington returned to his quarters to pack and get what rest he could before their early departure. He had just finished organizing his materials when his phone rang, an unexpected call from a base security officer. "Colonel Harrington, sir, there's been an incident at the quantum compound. Mr. Winters is demanding your presence." "What kind of incident?" "He's claiming sabotage, sir. Says his equipment was deliberately damaged by Harrington's people during today's exercise." It was an obvious trap, a desperate attempt to create confrontation before they could present their evidence in Washington. "Tell Mr. Winters that any complaints should be filed through proper channels. General Maxwell is the appropriate authority for test-related disputes." "He's quite insistent, sir. Threatened to call the secretary directly if you refuse to address his concerns." "Then let him call. I'll be available in General Maxwell's office at 0700 tomorrow for any officially sanctioned discussions." "Good night, Sergeant." Harrington ended the call, then immediately contacted David. "Winters is making his move. False accusations of sabotage, trying to force a confrontation tonight. Classic desperation play," David assessed. "Creates confusion, potentially delays our departure, gives him time to pressure Pentagon contacts to intervene." "Exactly. Maintain the plan but heighten security awareness. He's showing his hand now." Harrington completed his preparations and attempted to sleep, but rest proved elusive. The stakes were too high, the coming day too consequential for easy slumber. Instead, he found himself reviewing the journey that had brought him to this point, from tank commander in the deserts of Iraq to unlikely crusader for the future of American armored warfare. He thought about Carson, their friendship forged in combat and strained by politics, yet resilient enough to transcend those differences when it truly mattered. About Maxwell, the professional soldier navigating treacherous waters between military duty and political reality. About Captain Diaz and her crew, representing the best traditions of the Armored Corps while demonstrating its continuing relevance. And most of all, about David, his son, who had put aside personal grievances to fight alongside him for something they both believed in. Whatever happened tomorrow, that rekindled connection represented a victory more personal and perhaps more significant than any policy outcome. Morning arrived with a sense of charged anticipation. Harrington prepared methodically, securing his evidence and checking communications with his team. All reported ready, their travel arrangements proceeding as planned. He was about to depart for his meeting with Maxwell when an urgent knock came at his door. A young lieutenant stood outside, his expression tense. "Colonel Harrington, General Maxwell sent me to find you. There's a situation at the airfield. Your son's been detained by military police." "What? On what grounds?" "Security violation, sir. Something about unauthorized access to classified communication systems. The general is trying to sort it out now." Winter's countermove. With David detained, a crucial portion of their evidence and testimony would be compromised. More importantly, the accusation of security violations could taint all their findings, casting them as improperly obtained. "Where's he being held?" "Base security office, sir. The general suggested you come immediately." Harrington grabbed his secure phone and essential evidence, leaving the rest locked in his quarters. As he followed the lieutenant toward a waiting vehicle, he sent emergency alerts to Chen and Vasquez. David detained, possible attempt to prevent testimony, proceed with contingency plan. At the security office, Harrington found a tense standoff in progress. David sat stone-faced in an interview room, 2 military police officers standing guard. General Maxwell was engaged in heated discussion with a civilian whom Harrington recognized as a Pentagon security official. And observing it all with barely concealed satisfaction was John Winters. "What's the meaning of this?" Harrington demanded. Maxwell turned, his expression grim. "Lieutenant Colonel Harrington has been detained pending investigation into alleged unauthorized access to secure military communications networks. Mr. Winters has filed a formal complaint with supporting documentation." "This is transparent obstruction," Harrington stated flatly, "attempting to prevent testimony before the Senate committee this afternoon." "These are serious allegations," the Pentagon official interjected. "Lieutenant Colonel Harrington accessed classified signals, intelligence systems without proper authorization, monitoring communications outside approved channels. He was conducting authorized electronic warfare assessment as part of the evaluation team," Harrington countered. "General Maxwell approved his access. For standard monitoring only," Winters spoke up smoothly. "Not for penetrating proprietary corporate communications networks. We have evidence that Lieutenant Colonel Harrington attempted to access Quantum's secure command protocols during yesterday's exercise." The accusation was technically true, but deliberately misleading. David had indeed monitored Quantum's communications to document their use of unauthorized channels operating outside test parameters. "This is a matter for proper investigation," the Pentagon official stated firmly. "Lieutenant Colonel Harrington will remain in custody while we determine the facts. His scheduled appearance before the Senate committee is indefinitely postponed." Exactly as Winters had planned. By targeting David, he had not only removed a key witness, but created a pretext to question the legitimacy of all their evidence. Harrington maintained his composure with effort, military discipline asserting itself despite the provocation. "I'd like a moment alone with my son." "That's not possible during an active security investigation," the official began, but Maxwell intervened. "5 minutes supervised. I'll take responsibility." When the others reluctantly stepped out, leaving only a single MP observing from a distance, Harrington leaned close to David. "Did they seize your evidence?" David nodded fractionally. "Everything I was carrying, but the cloud backups are secure, accessible with the protocol we established. Chen has the access codes. They're trying to prevent our Senate testimony, obviously. But they've overlooked something critical." A ghost of a smile crossed David's face. "Captain Diaz." Harrington understood immediately. In focusing on stopping their testimony, Winters had forgotten about the tank crews who had witnessed his system's failure firsthand, particularly Diaz, whose encounter with the manually controlled drones represented the clearest evidence of protocol violations. "Can you get word to her?" "Already did. Emergency message before they took my phone. She knows to contact Chen and provide supporting testimony if we're delayed." A father's pride surged through Harrington. Even in custody, facing serious accusations, David had maintained tactical awareness and taken appropriate action to ensure mission success. "We'll fight this," Harrington promised. "The accusation is groundless, designed solely to prevent testimony." "I know. Go to Washington, Dad. Present what evidence you have. I'll handle things here." The Pentagon official returned, ending their brief conversation. "Colonel Harrington, your presence is requested in General Maxwell's office immediately. There's been a development." Harrington squeezed his son's shoulder briefly before following the official out. In the hallway, he passed Winters, who wore the satisfied expression of a man who believed victory was within grasp. "A shame about your son's legal troubles," Winters remarked with calculated concern. "Security violations can end promising military careers. Perhaps a quiet resolution could be arranged in exchange for certain considerations regarding your Senate testimony." The implied blackmail was so transparent it was almost laughable. "Save your breath, Winters. This desperate play won't work." "We'll see. The Secretary has taken a personal interest in this matter. Your committee appearance may be postponed pending resolution of these serious security concerns." In Maxwell's office, Harrington found not just the general but Senator Carson, who had apparently arrived during the detention drama. "Senator Carson has some information relevant to the current situation," Maxwell explained, his tone professionally neutral, but his eyes communicating deeper meaning. Carson wasted no time. "I've spoken directly with Senator Martinez. The committee hearing will proceed as scheduled, with or without Lieutenant Colonel Harrington's presence. They're particularly interested in testimony regarding this morning's detention and the timing of Mr. Winters' security complaint." "The Pentagon might still block my departure," Harrington noted. "They might try," Carson agreed, "which is why I've arranged alternative transportation. My personal aircraft is fueled and waiting at a private airfield 20 miles from here. No military jurisdiction, no ability for administrative delays." Harrington studied his old friend with new respect. "That's putting yourself at considerable risk, Bull. Perhaps it's time I remembered which side I'm really on." Carson checked his watch. "We need to move now if we're going to make the hearing." Maxwell, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. "Colonel Harrington, you are hereby released from all duties at Fort Irwin, effective immediately. Your presence is no longer required for the conclusion of Operation Comparative Edge." It was a carefully worded statement that technically freed Harrington to depart without directly contradicting Pentagon authority. A calculated risk on Maxwell's part, but one that honored his commitment to the integrity of the evaluation process. "Thank you, General." Harrington gathered his materials. "And my son?" "I'll do what I can," Maxwell promised. "But you need to present your evidence before Winters' allies can completely shut this down." Within 30 minutes, Harrington and Carson were en route to the private airfield, traveling in the senator's nondescript SUV rather than military transport. Carson drove in tense silence until they were well clear of the base. "Winters is in full panic mode," he finally said, "making calls to everyone from the defense secretary to the president's chief of staff. But he overplayed his hand with this detention stunt. Even his allies are questioning his judgment now." "He's desperate," Harrington agreed. "His entire business model collapses if the quantum system is rejected. But targeting my son crosses a line from business to personal. He was always going to cross that line. Men like Winters don't recognize boundaries when their interests are threatened." Carson navigated a turn onto a less traveled road. "I've been there myself, if I'm honest. Lost perspective when politics and personal ambition became too entangled." "What changed?" Harrington asked, genuinely curious. Carson was silent for a moment. "Seeing Diaz's tank yesterday, facing those drones after the termination order, it reminded me of us back at 73 Easting. Soldiers facing fire, making split-second decisions that technology alone can't handle." He shook his head slightly. "Some things matter more than contracts or campaign contributions. I just lost sight of that for a while." They arrived at the private airfield to find a sleek business jet waiting, engines already spooling up. As they boarded, Carson's phone buzzed with a message. "Martinez has expanded the hearing," he reported, reading the screen. "Full committee now, with press access. Winters has been formally summoned to appear. He won't show, Harrington predicted. Too much risk of direct questioning under oath. Maybe not, but his absence will speak volumes. The flight to Washington took just under 4 hours, time Harrington used to reorganize his evidence and prepare his testimony. Without David's technical documentation, certain aspects of Quantum's deception would be harder to prove conclusively, but the operational failures witnessed by dozens of observers remained incontrovertible. They landed at Reagan National Airport at 12:15, proceeding directly to the Senate office building where the emergency hearing had been convened. Chen was waiting for them in the anteroom, her expression shifting from anxiety to relief at their arrival. "We weren't sure you'd make it," she admitted. "The Pentagon has been trying to shut this down all morning. Classification orders, jurisdiction challenges, even questioning the committee's authority to review ongoing military procurement." "Any word on David?" Harrington asked immediately. "Released 30 minutes ago. General Maxwell intervened directly. He's flying commercial. Should arrive in a few hours." It was the best news Harrington had heard all day. Whatever happened in the hearing, his son was safe and free. "What about Diaz?" "She's here," Chen confirmed. "Arrived an hour ago with her gunner, Specialist Lee. Martinez arranged emergency military transport once he understood the situation." Everything was falling into place despite Winter's desperate countermoves. As they prepared to enter the hearing room, Harrington felt a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't just about tanks versus drones or personal vindication. It was about ensuring that American soldiers would have the most effective, reliable equipment on future battlefields, where lives hung in the balance of procurement decisions. The Senate Armed Services Committee hearing room was packed when they entered. Senators lined the raised dais, staffers clustered behind them with briefing materials, and press representatives filled the public gallery. Captain Diaz and Specialist Lee sat at a witness table, already prepared to testify. And most surprisingly, seated at the respondents' table with a team of lawyers and corporate representatives, was John Winters himself. The Quantum CEO had evidently decided that absence would be more damaging than direct questioning. Senator Martinez, the committee chairman, called the hearing to order with practiced authority. "This emergency session will address serious allegations regarding the evaluation process for the proposed replacement of main battle tanks with autonomous drone systems. The committee has received concerning reports of test manipulation, protocol violations, and corporate interference in what should have been an objective military assessment." Martinez outlined the hearing structure, then called Harrington as the first witness. Taking his seat at the testimony table, Harrington felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of months of struggle against corporate influence and political pressure. "Colonel Harrington," Martinez began, "please summarize for the committee what you observed during Operation Comparative Edge, particularly concerning the performance of the Quantum autonomous system under realistic combat conditions." Harrington spoke clearly and directly, describing the 3 phases of testing and the progressive failure of the Quantum system when confronted with adverse conditions. He detailed the unauthorized demonstration on day 2, the hidden relay network discovered on day 3, and most damning, the continuation of attack operations after the official termination order. "In essence," he concluded, "the Quantum system demonstrated fundamental vulnerabilities in precisely the conditions most likely to occur in actual combat. When communications were degraded by weather and electronic interference, the autonomous capabilities failed catastrophically. Most concerning was the system's operation outside established safety protocols, presenting actual risk to military personnel during what should have been a controlled evaluation." As questions came from committee members, Harrington responded with military precision, neither embellishing nor minimizing what he had witnessed. The evidence was compelling enough without exaggeration. Captain Diaz testified next, providing first-hand account of the final day's events, particularly the drone attack that continued after the termination order. Her technical expertise and combat experience lent powerful credibility to her testimony. "In my professional judgment, as an Abrams commander with 3 combat deployments," she stated firmly, "replacing main battle tanks with the Quantum system as demonstrated would significantly reduce our combat effectiveness while introducing new vulnerabilities our adversaries would quickly exploit." Specialist Lee, the gunner who had manually targeted the drone during the electronic attack on day 2, provided equally compelling testimony about the value of human adaptability when technology failed or was compromised. When Winters finally took the stand, his corporate smoothness had abandoned him. Faced with detailed technical questions about his system's failures and specific allegations of test manipulation, he alternated between technical obfuscation and thinly veiled accusations of military bias against innovative technology. The tests were fundamentally flawed, he insisted, designed by tank advocates to favor existing systems over next-generation alternatives. The weather anomaly on the final day created conditions no system could reasonably be expected to handle. Yet the Abrams tanks continued to function effectively under those same conditions, Martinez pointed out. Different technologies with different operational parameters, Winters countered. The comparison is invalid. Isn't that precisely what the tests were designed to evaluate? Another senator challenged. The relative performance of different systems under realistic battlefield conditions? The questioning continued for over an hour, progressively exposing the contradictions in Winters' position and the evidence of deliberate manipulation throughout the test process. The final witness was Carson himself, whose testimony provided the political context that had enabled Quantum's near success despite its technical failures. "I must take personal responsibility for my role in this situation," he stated with unexpected candor. "I allowed campaign contributions and political calculations to influence my position on a matter of national security. The committee should consider additional safeguards to prevent such conflicts of interest in future procurement decisions." As the hearing concluded, Martinez announced that the committee would issue preliminary findings within 24 hours with a full report to follow. But the outcome was already clear from the senators' questions and comments. The quantum system had failed its evaluation, and the attempt to eliminate America's tank force would not proceed as planned. Outside the hearing room, Harrington found himself surrounded by press-seeking comments, but his attention was drawn to a familiar figure approaching through the crowd. David, having arrived from his delayed flight, made his way toward his father with a relieved smile. Their embrace was brief but heartfelt, military reserve giving way to genuine emotion. "You made it," Harrington said simply. "Wouldn't have missed it," David replied. "Sounds like you didn't need my testimony after all. We presented what evidence we had. The truth was compelling enough." As the crowd dispersed and the immediate pressure lifted, Harrington found a moment of quiet reflection with his son, Carson, Chen, and the tank crew who had played such crucial roles in the day's events. "What happens now?" David asked. "The committee will recommend continued investment in both technologies," Carson predicted. "Tanks for their proven reliability and human element, autonomous systems for specific mission profiles where they demonstrate genuine advantages." "And Winters?" Chen inquired. "Quantum's stock is already in free fall," Carson replied. "Their investors won't wait for the final report. He'll be lucky to survive as CEO through the week." Captain Diaz and Specialist Lee excused themselves to catch their return transport to Fort Irwin, but not before Harrington thanked them personally for their courage and professionalism throughout the ordeal. "Just doing our jobs, sir," Diaz responded with characteristic modesty. "Though I admit, it's satisfying to prove the tank still has a place on the modern battlefield." As evening fell over Washington, Harrington found himself on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with his son, both men contemplating the illuminated mall stretching before them. The day's tension had finally begun to dissipate, replaced by a tentative sense of accomplishment. "I've been meaning to ask you something," David said after a comfortable silence. "Why tanks? Why was this fight so important to you personally?" Harrington considered the question carefully. "It wasn't really about tanks, not ultimately. It was about ensuring soldiers have the right tools for impossible situations, about recognizing that human judgment still matters in warfare, perhaps more than ever in an age of increasing automation." He paused, watching the lights reflecting in the reflecting pool. "And maybe it was about legacy, not mine personally, but the legacy of every tank commander who's made critical decisions in the heat of battle, from World War I to Afghanistan. Their experience, their sacrifice, deserves honest evaluation, not corporate manipulation." David nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that better now than I did before all this started." "And you?" Harrington asked. "Why did you risk your career to help expose the truth?" "Initially, professional integrity. The evidence was clear that Quantum was selling a flawed system." David's expression softened slightly. "But eventually it became something more personal. Watching you fight for what you believed in, regardless of the pin, it reminded me of values I'd always respected, even when we were at odds. It wasn't full reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a foundation they could build upon. Some wounds might never completely heal, but understanding had replaced anger. Respect had overcome resentment." As they descended the memorial steps, ready to face whatever challenges awaited in the days ahead, Harrington felt a profound sense of peace. The battle for the future of American armored warfare had been fought and won, not through politics or technology, but through the most human of qualities: integrity, courage, and the determination to stand for truth regardless of personal cost. In that victory lay the real legacy of the tank commander's journey, not the preservation of a weapons system, but the affirmation of the human element that had always been and would always remain the decisive factor in warfare and in life itself.